Solemn days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host and constant reader, Scott Daly, and joining me, as always, the guy who now officially knows what a standpipe is. It's Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
It's just like a big thing of water. That's what it is.
Yeah. Pretty sure that's what I said when you asked the first time.
Yeah, but my description was much more descriptive.
It's like a standing pipe of water.
It's a water tower that for some reason they didn't make into a water tower. I'm sure there's a reason for it. I just don't know.
The same reason that they didn't lock it.
I guess so that they could use it as like a kind of fly trap for children. Yeah, good point.
This week on the show, our 19-part coverage of Stephen King's It continues with part 6 covering chapters 9 and Derry, the Second Interlude. We get the last of the Losers Club point of view as Bev travels both physically and mentally back to Derry. Then Mike Hanlon continues his Derry history lesson as we learn all about the fire at the Black Spot. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
Loved both of these chapters. Great to finally get deeper into Bev's head, come to understand her child self a bit better. I think we already obviously had the adult Bev chapter, but and we had a little tiny bit of Bev interiority previously, but this was by far the I guess you could say the establishing Bev as a child chapter. And really good, really interesting stuff going on. I think there's going to be a lot of kind of subtextual stuff for us to talk about, which is always something we enjoy. And then the second half of the episode is discussing, one of the favorite things that King does is kind of throw a nice little complete short story in the middle of his novel. I'm always there for that, and this is a fantastic example of that. So yeah, really. I almost don't know which of the two sections I'm more excited to talk about.
That's a great place to be at, I think, and I'm with you here. I really enjoyed both of these chapters. I think the most surprising thing about chapter 9 to me is not, how much we get to learn about Bev, which is to be expected, but I think how much of the chapter we get to learn about Stan, who is kind of, this is the first time we've been in Bev's point of view back in 1958, but we also really didn't see or know anything about kid Stanley Uris, right? And we get a lot of that here as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, they don't want to shortchange Stan. I mean, it sort of manages to be his introductory chapter at the same time that it's sort of also serving as being Bev's introductory chapter, and somehow feels like it does justice to both of them. Yeah, just overall incredibly solid chapter.
Yeah, I agree. I love them both. I mean, I think the Black Spot interlude is always kind of a part of this book that I always remember. I think the writing there is really fantastic. It's a very tragic story, and it simultaneously is right at home in the middle of this book, while also being something that could exist as you said, as just a completely independent short story.
Exactly. Yep.
But let's get into it. Let's talk about it. We begin with chapter 9, Cleaning Up. As mentioned above, this chapter centers on the last adult loser, Bev Marsh. When we reconnect with Bev once again in an italicized text, we are also on a plane flying towards Maine as she, for some reason, begins to laugh uncontrollably. I really like this opening little bit here as we really start to get into Bev's chapter. It says, "We laughed a lot back then," she thinks. "It is something else, another light on the dark. We were afraid all the time, but we couldn't stop laughing any more than I can stop now." I kind of love this, Matt, as like kind of a fundamental thesis statement of the mood of the book, which has thus far been this really interesting mix of terror, definitely some of that, but also of just genuine enjoyment. Like, I'm wondering if this is a surprise to you, Matt, maybe both conceptually before you went into the book, but also just like after the first couple of chapters of the book. Like, is it a surprise to you that this book is fun? It is. It's funny. It's fun. It's also terrifying and disturbing. It is definitely those things, but it can be both. And I think this is a great kind of window into childhood. That childhood can be both this incredibly terrifying experience, but also incredibly, incredibly fun.
Well, I think it is kind of surprising. We've jumped around chronologically with King, so I've read, the later stuff that he's written, and I'm aware of how he's capable of varying his tone. But I guess
Hmm.
I will say that, linearly speaking, like s- somebody who just read Salem's Lot and just read The Shining and just read The Long Walk might pick this book up and be very surprised at the levity and humor and lightheartedness that's present there. Because usually King is either doing pretty straightforward like gothic horror or some kind of psychological horror. And I guess this is psychological horror, but it like you said, it's I think he realized, especially further on in his career, that that can feel a little bit monotonous, and you need to liven it up and vary the tone, um, while not sacrificing any of the the real pathos that is there. So yeah, that's an interesting question. I guess to reiterate, I'm not that surprised because I've at this point read quite a bit of King, honestly,
Hmm.
but I can see how this is like an evolution in his style. The other thing I'd point out about this, just like what you just said about humor and fun in the midst of terror. Every once in a while you'll see videos from war, either an old video or you'll see something from the ongoing war in Ukraine right now or what have you. And what often strikes me is like, unless it's like a video of combat, which is of course always extremely dire, unless it's a video of combat, the soldiers are usually like joking around trying to make each other laugh, or at least often, if not usually.
Hmm.
um and it reminds me of how these soldiers, just like these children in this story, are finding and giving strength to each other through humor and keeping each other's spirits up in that specific way. So I think it makes sense, actually. Like it's not just that King wants to keep the tone a little bit lighter. It's that it actually is a realistic way that humans are and would be in the situation.
No, I agree. I totally agree. The idea that they did use laughter and just allowing themselves to be kids throughout so much of this experience is key to it for sure.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it's like it's so funny because it's like I feel like the perception of it is a certain thing in pop culture, and then you like tell people that it is your favorite book, and then the natural follow-up question is, well, what's your favorite part about it? And you're like, well, I really like when the kids are just like acting like kids and like goofing around with each other.
Hmm.
And people are like, it what?
That's your favorite part. Yeah. No,
In
but
the spooky clown book, really?
uh
But yeah, it kind of is. It kind of is.
yeah. I mean, I think a person who really understood King's range would know that that's one of the things that he does best. So it makes
Yeah.
sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So Bev fends off the advances of the dude sitting next to her on the plane and then starts to think back to the events immediately following her departure from Tom and how she got on this plane. Before we move on from this random dude on the plane, I did want to talk about this for a bit because I find this bit really fascinating. He really is good looking, she thinks suddenly. It's a fresh thought, somehow clear eyed, the sort of thought you might expect to have upon waking when your mind isn't all junked up. He's wearing a pullover sweater and faded jeans. His darkish blonde hair is tied back with a piece of rawhide, and this makes her think of the ponytail she always wore in her hair when she was a kid. She thinks, I bet he's got a nice, polite college boy's cock. Long enough to jazz with, not thick enough to be really arrogant. I just I'm fascinated by this, right? Like this whole sequence, she's this guy is almost clearly like immediately hitting on her and she's completely uninterested, and yet she can't help her mind like immediately going to this place of escalating from, oh, this is not a bad looking dude, to I'm thinking about his dick.
Uh-huh.
Like just the idea that she like immediately escalates to this place of sexual curiosity specifically is just really fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, plus it's like there's like an absurdist angle to the sexuality.
Sure.
I think there's a number of different ways you could go with this, just this paragraph that you just read. The bit, I don't actually know if you read. Oh yeah, so before the part that you read, uh, the text says, he really is good looking. She thinks suddenly, and it is a fresh thought, somehow clear eyed, the sort of thought you might expect to have upon waking when your mind isn't all junked up. And I
Hmm.
thought that was interesting because it's like she's waking up from what exactly? Well, she's waking up from this like years long sexual terrorism campaign by her husband,
Yeah.
and maybe this is the first time that she's even sexually noticed a man other than her husband because she's been so sort of forcibly repressed by his control over her life. So that's one angle you could take on it, right? And then,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, I like
like,
that. This idea that like she's been so terrified for so long, she hasn't even allowed herself to have these thoughts, and so this is really the reflection of a person who is perhaps allowing herself to sexualize someone else for the first time in a long time.
yeah, yeah. And I think we're priming sort of a lot of Bev's sort of trauma and core wound as a character has to do with sexuality in a way that's just not the case for the other characters,
Correct. Yep.
and thus centering that here makes sense.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, I think we're going to get into that a lot here in just a minute, but that's this whole chapter is like stuffed with a lot of subtext about Bev's sexuality, or oncoming sexuality and what that means to her and the life she lives.
Right.
So Bev tells her best friend Kay, who she calls after leaving Tom. She calls her, and Bev's or Kay sends her a car, gets her clothes, gets her some money, and sends her on her way. I really love, Matt, the inclusion of Kay here. Actually, I think she's able to be this outside light, kind of shining light on Bev's situation here to show us that the whole situation was really as bad as we've seen. We only saw like one interaction really between them, and we know it's bad, but like it's more than just we know it's bad and Bev knows it's bad. It's possibly even worse. Like this idea that every single one of Bev's friends knows how bad Tom is, knows how awful and violent and terrible this relationship is, but couldn't manage to talk her into leaving. I think is a really great little detail to throw in here. I think it also again serves to kind of demonstrate the power of the promise Bev made. Like this idea that like Kay has possibly been talking to Bev for years about leaving this guy, has been trying to do everything she can to get her to leave this guy, and none of it was working, none of it was happening. And then this one single phone call from Mike is finally able to do the thing that Kay wasn't able to do for all those years. It shows how powerful this promise is once again. I really actually like this part where Bev says she doesn't want to fly out of O'Hare and instead is going to drive all the way up to Milwaukee and fly out of there just so she can avoid Tom showing up at the airport, which she figures he'll do. And Kay's like immediate assumption to the reason for that is because Bev's afraid that if she sees Tom there, he'll manage to talk her back into coming home.
Mhm.
And we know, and Bev knows that that's not a possibility. That there's no way that would happen because the promise that she made. But it's just my whole point is here that it's really effective way to uh, really nail in the situation that we're in here.
100%. Yeah, I had the same exact thought. I agree that that's super effective storytelling, and just the emotionality of it worked on me
Yeah,
really well. Like I, I teared up at a few unexpected places in this week's reading. One of them was, I got to give part of the credit to the audiobook reader, but like the effusive sincerity and emotionality of Kay's bid to get Bev away from Dickhead McGee was just so touching, because like you could hear you could hear in the words like, finally
yeah,
my friend who I love and care for is finally going to get out of the situation,
yeah.
and like this has been a thing that's just been upsetting her for years, like you said. It all comes across in the text, um
Hmm.
and I found it really emotional, actually, that somebody cares about Bev this much, basically.
Yeah, it's important to see that, right? I think we want Bev to we want to understand Bev as a person that's been through this terrible, terrible thing, but we also want to see that her life wasn't just this one narrow thing with Tom. It was the other people that surrounded her. And I think that is a good reflection of her life back in Derry as well. That it was a life ruled by her father, but it was also a life in which she had these friendships with all these other people that strengthened her.
Yeah, yeah.
So back on the plane, Bev starts thinking back, as our other characters have done, and slowly remembering the terror awaiting her in Derry. I just had to read this part a bit because it breaks my heart a little bit. She looks out the window, looks down, and thinks that Tom's evil is a small and petty thing compared with the evil waiting for her in Derry. If there's a compensation, it's that Bill Denbrough is there. And there was a time when an 11-year-old girl named Beverly Marsh loved Bill Denbrough. She remembers the postcard with the lovely poem written on the back, and remembers that she once knew who wrote it. She doesn't remember any more than she remembers exactly what the poem said, but she thinks it might have been Bill. Yes, it might well have been stuttering Bill Denbrough. No,
Oh, no, Bev,
no.
no. Why you do this to me, Stephen King? Damn it.
This is delightful storytelling, though, I think, because like we had that beautiful moment in the previous chapter, right, where we have this powerful connection between these two characters, Ben and Bev, and then we also get this reinforcement of she got the poem, she loved the poem, and she knows immediately who wrote the poem. It's Ben.
Yeah.
It's seemingly, oh, no silly love triangle here, right? And then here in the future, as an adult, as she's remembering these things, she's misattributing things.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I part of me really doesn't want there to be a love triangle, not because I don't trust Stephen King to handle a love triangle in a way that's dramatically interesting, but because I just love these characters and I don't want them to be sad. Um I don't want Ben to be sad specifically because I
Yeah.
love Ben. But yeah, no, I was definitely had the reaction of like, damn it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what comes of it. I don't want to spoil anything for you,
Yeah,
but it's really interesting choice for sure.
yeah, yeah.
So we jump back into 1958 with Bev hearing a small child calling her from down her sink drain. It's one of the children that Pennywise has killed, calling to her, beckoning her down in the drain with them. And then suddenly, Matt, the drain belches up a spout of blood that covers the entire bathroom. Everything is covered. The walls, the floor, the sink itself, towels, everything is covered in blood.
Yeah. It's such an interestingly different encounter in contrast to sort of the regularity of the boys' encounters where they all
Yeah.
saw a creature one way or another, some kind of creature. Um, but I think as we'll discuss, Bev does have something in common with them in that she has also seen her own greatest fear.
Yeah, I'm really hesitant to like be a little little gender normative here and be like, boys fear big scary monster, girl fear much more complicated and layered actually. But that's kind of what we're being shown here a little bit, right?
Sure. I mean, I do think the text, I'll say this sort of at a high level because there's not really a moment that exemplifies it super well, but like the differences between boys and girls are emphasized in this chapter in particular.
Mhm.
One thing about Bev is that she's often screaming and crying, right?
Mhm.
The boys rarely, the boys like have to be pushed to extremity to cry.
Yeah, I mean,
Eh,
Richie and Bill's moment of crying was built up by the book as like a huge big deal moment,
Yeah.
right?
And Bev cries like 3 different times that I can remember in this week's reading. And this
Mhm.
is, and I don't think the text is being like, Bev is a sissy little baby girl. It's just like there are like inculcated, behavioral differences between the sexes. The boys have, been traumatized by their 1950s upbringing to never cry. Um, and
Yes.
and Bev has had, if anything, the opposite conditioning. And so
Yeah.
but
Mhm.
the text doesn't shy away from that fact. Like it it shows these differences
Yeah.
and
No,
focuses
I think
on
you're
them.
right.
Yeah, yeah,
I think you're right. I think you're right. So God, we got so much to talk about here, but let's get into it. So Bev screams, and we get our first look at Al Marsh, Bev's abusive asshole father. There's a whole lot to say about Al here, Matt. Both today and I think many times throughout the rest of this book. But the thing that I think is so effective about this introduction is how unnerving, creepy, and terrifying it is, actually.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think there's also an element of foreshadowing that has underscored that creepiness and fear, in terms of how we perceive him, because the book has been very clear the entire time that Bev's adult woes are all due to the trauma inflicted by this asshole. So I have been anticipating his awfulness this whole time, and when he finally shows up, I'm just like clenched, ready for the hurricane.
Yeah. And he does not let you down.
Yeah, yeah.
So Bev is shouting to him about the bathroom, something that happened in the bathroom, and we see that this is the first thing her father thinks and says, "Was someone peeking at you, Beverly? Huh?" His arm shot out and hand gripped her arm hard, sinking into the flesh. There was a concern on his face, but it was a predatory concern, somehow more frightening than comforting. So she says something's in the bathroom, and he immediately goes to, "Oh, someone trying to look at your lady parts," and is concerned about that, but not in a good way, right? I love that word usage, a predatory concern. Like
Right.
this is you're trying to take my kill,
Yeah.
my food.
Yeah, no, I love that. And also just, the fact that that's the first thing on his mind is telling
Yeah.
that that's where his mind is. Because if I hear one of my daughters scream from the bathroom, I'm like, oh, it's a spider in the bathroom. First
Yeah.
thought.
Yeah,
But
I think it would be pretty freaking far down the list of
yeah,
thoughts would be like, oh, someone must have peeped through the window at her.
yeah,
But
somehow,
not
yeah,
Al. Nope.
right.
And then there's this little bit here as well. He did not drink. He did not smoke. He did not chase after women. I got all the women I need at home, he said on occasion. And when he said it, a peculiar, secretive smile would cross his face. It did not brighten it, but it did quite the opposite. Watching that smile was like watching the shadow of a cloud travel rapidly across a rocky field. They take care of me, and when they need it, I take care of them. Good.
This is why I think maybe there's a place for the death penalty in our world. It's just kind of, guys like this. That's all. That's all I'm
I
gonna say.
really like. Yes, this is awful, right? Like just that smile. But King's writing here is so effective, right? A peculiar, secretive smile would cross his face. It did not brighten that face, though. It did the opposite of brighten a face. Like you think a smile brightens a person's face. Not when Al Marsh smiles like this. No, 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 no. And so he hasn't even like done anything yet, really. And already we're just like we're right there, right?
Yeah. This may be like my favorite Stephen King simile that I can recall at the top of my head. Watching that smile was like watching the shadow of a cloud travel rapidly across a rocky field. It's an amazing visual image.
Yeah.
And it connects so well with, the subject. Gosh, I
Mhm.
really, really like that.
Yeah, and so okay, we got to talk about the blood a little bit here, Matt. I think with all the clues that we're being given and the subtext we're being given, I think we can kind of start to make a guess at as what's going on here, right? Even if our character Bev doesn't quite see it yet, Pennywise seems to come at you at the form that scares you the most, and when it shows itself to Bev, it does so in the form of a spout of blood in the bathroom. I think we need to get Carrie White on the phone because I think we've got another period metaphor going on here again, Matt. What do you think?
I have to admit that I imagine Tabitha looking up from the book, going again with this, Stephen. But no, I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot. Once you clock onto the idea, there's a lot there to support it.
Yeah, and I'm going to say this, like, obviously we are not women. Stephen King, not a woman, not experienced a period, but there is, to me, it feels like a lot of the channeling of, a young girl getting her first period and then like being terrified of it and trying to hide it from her family, right? Like this is a thing she feels deeply ashamed about, and she's going to try to hide it and hide the evidence of it. It feels like a lot of this chapter is resembling that general idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe I'm being too literal on some level, but I'm seeing it as like she knows that womanhood carries a risk for her on some level. Does she know that her father is going to start molesting her? I don't know. Maybe on some. She it may be one of those things that she knows but doesn't want to acknowledge. the human mind is complicated and we keep secrets from ourselves. Um, and thus she doesn't even see that it's period blood, but
Yeah.
but Pennywise knows what she's afraid of
Yeah.
and knows that this is scary to her for reasons beyond just, oh, a bunch of blood coming out of the sink. It's
Yeah.
taunting her with this thing that she knows is going to ruin her life and just make her far more unhappy than she already is.
And isn't that great, right? I mean, like that's such a good idea of reflecting it this way, because you're right. Bev doesn't know, or doesn't realize, maybe she knows deep down, and that there is a lot of subtext here. Like there is nothing in this book so far that states specifically that, oh, Al Marsh is going to abuse his daughter. All right, like we know he physically abuses her, right? But there's nothing we've been told yet that there is any kind of sexual abuse going on, and yet there is this uncomfortable threat of that looming over us multiple times throughout this chapter. Just like, that idea of, I got all the women I need at home, and his creepy smile. He says later, I think he's like, I'm worried about you, Bev. And there's some ominousness to that. The random question her mother asks her about him, does he ever touch you? Right. Like it is there. It
Yeah.
is there. And she understands that it's there, even if she doesn't fully understand what it means yet. And we're seeing this fear like reflect that it almost makes it more scary that she doesn't really understand it, right? It's this
Yeah.
horrible thing that she's terrified of happening, and shameful of, yet, but she doesn't really even understand that yet.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, all of that I agree. And there's, like you just said, there's more than enough breadcrumbs in this chapter for us to be like, okay, I see where this is going. It's
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
it's very clear where the story is heading, or at least what challenges we're going to be setting up for our characters.
Yeah. An interesting wrinkle in this whole thing, though, Matt, is as Bev screams and Alan Marsh comes into the bathroom, he can't see the blood all over the place. Indeed, neither can Bev's mom. We'll learn a little bit later, and we'll learn even later in the chapter that it seems like only children can see the blood. So it is not just limited to Bev. It is not just her illusion, delusion. It
Mhm.
is. It seems to be a thing that kids can see it, adults cannot, which is interesting, right? We've known that Derry tends to choose not to see some of the most evil, insidious parts of itself. That is an established fact of this town. But this is the first time we've kind of been told it is literally unable to see things.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's suggestive that adults can't see any of these apparitions. We don't know that for a fact, but certainly nobody ever helped the other kids when they were running away from the monsters that were chasing them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I guess there's only one exception I can think of to an adult seeing one of these monsters, and that's at the very end of this week's reading, actually. So
Yeah, I mean, I think the other we have to point out is obviously Adrian Mellon and his boyfriend, right?
true, true, true,
They
true.
were young, but not children, so
Yeah,
it's interesting, right? I mean, there's nothing really to glam onto there, other than in this particular instance, this seems to be a thing that no adult can see,
yeah.
which
I
again
guess,
is kind of reinforcing the idea of the power of childhood.
yeah. That's really interesting. I'm processing what that could mean because I'm trying to remember. Did it wasn't just the victim, you know, Adrian Mellon and his boyfriend that saw Pennywise. It was also the attackers too, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's not like, yeah, okay. I'll think about that. That's a good
Sure.
point. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of what you kind of want to do. I think we just talked about as this gushing blood in the bathroom being a period metaphor, and then you kind of want to go, okay, well, what does adults not being able to see the period metaphor mean, right? Like that was kind of my first thought going through this, and I don't have a entirely satisfactory answer, but I do like the idea of Bev is the idea of Bev is on the cusp of quote unquote womanhood, and um maybe her parents aren't quite ready to see it yet.
Mm-hmm.
Um that's the best I can come up with there. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. I don't have anything better either. Yeah. Okay.
I really just wanted to read this part because I really like kind of the way King writes the disgustingness of the fact that his like hands are covered in blood and he can't see it. I just really like this. He turned off the water, grabbed a towel on which two fans of blood from the drain had splashed. He began to dry his hands. She watched, near swooning, as he grimed blood into his big knuckles and the lines of his palms. She could see blood under his fingernails like marks of guilt. Just love that. Like, just like he's just like covering himself in it and doesn't even realize it. Ugh.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not the kind of thing that I would have thought about as being gross, but then as I read the description, I got it, you know.
Yeah. So Al starts beating the shit out of Bev for, I guess, getting scared for no reason. I guess that's the reason or
Yeah,
something.
that makes sense. Yeah.
And then he starts talking about, that statement he repeats several times throughout this chapter is, "I'm really worried about you, Bev," which just has just an ominous feel to it every time he says it. Her reaction to this is to kind of quickly make up a story about how she saw a spider crawl up the drain, and that's why she screamed, which causes him to immediately calm down and be like, "Oh, so you were just being a stupid woman. Okay, got
Yeah.
it." And then he's completely happy again. And then we get to see the softer side of Al. You couldn't tell by the way I said that I was putting that word in quotes.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah,
And
I got it.
and then there's this part here. She felt her love for him. It never hit you when you did. I never hit you when you didn't deserve it, Beverly, he told her once when she had cried out that some punishment had been unfair. And surely that had to be true, because he was capable of love. Sometimes he would spend a whole day with her, showing her how to do things, or just telling her stuff, or walking around town with her. And when he was kind like that, she thought her heart would swell with happiness until it killed her. I hate
Yeah.
him so much.
Yeah. It's just the worst, right? And it's
Yeah.
the same idea that we see later with her husband, or earlier
Yeah.
with her husband, or whatever.
It's
Yeah.
it's the same trap, the trap of, oh, well, he's really nice to me every once in a while, and that means he loves me. And so the other parts must mean he loves me too, right?
Yeah.
The way we see her kind of internalize the the abuse and make it all about her and not about him.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course. He says he loves me and he says he does it only when I deserve it, so he must be right and I must deserve this.
Yeah, yeah. That's the part that sucks. I mean, another thing that's just kind of permeates this whole chapter is the way she speaks to him is this incredibly servile,
Yeah.
like painfully just beaten down fashion, where it like she's always trying to anticipate what he is thinking so that she can make sure to say the right thing and not say the wrong thing, and just constantly walking on eggshells, and like she's not even aware she's doing it. That's just her life.
Hmm.
Like there's no narrative element where she's like, it was exhausting having to do this, which is like, no, this is what my existence is as a child, is walking on eggshells all the time.
Yeah, the moment where she's making him breakfast and like she's like, "Where's the bacon?" She's like, "Well, we're out of bacon." And he's like, "Well, okay, well, make me hamburger." And she's like, "Well, there was a little bit left and I was going to save it for," and he just gives her a look and it's just
Yeah.
like, "Oh my god." Like, first of all, making your 11-year-old daughter make you breakfast. Fuck you.
Uh-huh.
But also like it's just awful. It's awful.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's pretty infuriating. I agree.
Mhm. Mhm. So Al puts bed to bed, tucks her in like he always did, the book says. And this is a question I have for you and maybe some people in the audience. I don't know. I don't have a kid. My kid is 2 years old. So you're going to have to kind of field this one. Is it like normal to tuck a 12-year-old in every night? Like I don't know how I feel. Like I think the way I kind of got to the bottom of this as I thought about it is just this is meant to be a creepy moment. Whether or not it's completely normal and fine to tuck your 11 or 12-year-old in every night, the way the way Al Marsh does it is creepy.
Yeah. The way, I mean, so yeah, my kids aren't quite this old, and I do still tuck my kids in, and I think that the like one way to think about it is like usually the mom is the one who does the tucking in job, or that's how I was raised anyway. I shouldn't say usually. There's no
Mhm.
rules of these things, but I just always found that my mom was usually the one to tuck me in when I was a kid. And I think like you said, it's more that like there's just like a human loving way to tuck in a child, and
Yeah.
that is not the way that Al does it.
Yeah, I mean, he tucks her in and then, like, stands there awkwardly for a little while.
Uh-huh.
And this is like the when the book discusses kind of the shapes of men that Bev has internalized over her life, that like any time she sees a man kind of standing like this in this particular way that her father used to be, like there's connection she has to that standing there. So yeah, I mean, I think it reads creepy, and it's supposed to read creepy. I'm not like concluding that tucking in your 11-year-old is in itself creepy. I do agree with you. Like, if we're going to go back to the 1950s, especially, and we're going to say, what was the mother's place and the father's place in the raising of children in the 50s in particular, I think it would be a little unusual for a father, to tuck their child in every night.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
and that's like the text emphasizes that, right? Every night. Like, does mom tuck you in ever? Because it seems like what we're saying is daddy does this every single night.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree with all that. I mean, I guess like fundamentally, there's just like the vibe is just totally off. Like there's a certain
Yeah.
kind of loving father daughter vibe that one expects that is like I don't want to say correct because everybody can have their own unique relationship with their child, but like
Mhm.
a warmth, some kind of warmth, you know, some kind of like cutesiness and actual love and tenderness shown. And with him, it's just like it really does seem like an excuse for him to like look at her weirdly
Yeah.
and leer at her basically.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And keep saying that, and that I worry about you. I worry about you. Yeah. It's just,
yeah, yeah,
and he doesn't ever like go into detail about what he means by that, which is also what makes it so ominous and creepy.
right, yeah, yeah,
So the next morning, we get to see Bev's typical morning, waking up early and quickly to get ready and kind of avoid her father as much as possible as she moves around the house. One of the things she does in the morning is, of course, check her new bruises from last night's punishment. She also observes her unstoppable approach to womanhood as she kind of looks at her chest and sees her breasts starting to come in. I love this line here, like, and it really connects to what we've been talking about before, like this understanding that maybe she hasn't fully realized yet, but it was true. Childhood would end. She would be a woman, um, which is like, there's a lot of like positive, exciting emotions connected to that for kids, right? But there is for Bev especially like this perhaps ununderstood ominous tinge to it as well.
mhm. Yeah, I agree, yeah, yep,
And so her father leaves for the day, and this part really broke my heart right here. It says, as she always did, Beverly went to the window of her room and watched him walk down the street. And as she always did, she felt a sneaking sense of relief when he turned the corner, and hated herself for it. That last bit right there just absolutely breaks your heart, right? Like, she has this understandable, completely relatable fear of her father, and knows that her life is easier and more relaxing when he is gone. And yet, she has kind of taken his monstrousness into herself so much that she's feeling guilty for feeling relief. It's
yeah.
awful.
Yeah, well, I mean, she doesn't. She fears and sort of dislikes her father, but also loves him at the same time, and it causes this terrible inward tension.
Yeah.
Again, connecting back to the nostalgia she feels when her future husband hits her, it's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I simultaneously hate this guy and I love this guy, and that's the nostalgia right there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I hadn't thought about that, but I think you're absolutely right there. That it's a perfect line drawn between those two things.
Mhm.
Um, okay, so From here, Matt, Dad goes away, and Bev spends the morning with her mom cleaning out the entire apartment. They know they have to do a good job, or they will be punished for it. Bev manages to avoid the blood-stained bathroom as much as possible. Before her mom goes out for the rest of the day, she asks Bev an interesting question, one that Bev doesn't really understand at all. The question is, we've already talked about this a little bit, but it is, does he touch you? And I think this is probably the moment in the chapter where, we talked about the symbolism and the subtext kind of going on in the previous moments. I think this is perhaps the moment, if you hadn't picked up on that stuff, this question might be where you start connecting those dots and everything starts coming together, to kind of draw this much clearer picture of what the threat here is.
Mhm. Yeah.
I really love that King uses these parentheticals to really bind these two moments together, though, right? She asked the question, "Does he touch you?" And then in Bev's mind, as she's trying to process this in the background, we get two parentheticals. The first is, "Does he?" which is links to that question that she was asked, and then the second one is, "Worry an awful lot," which is what Al says to her. I worry awful lot about you, Bev, and it's a perfect way, Stephen, of showing that you want your character to link these two ideas in their head, but not be conscious that they're linking these two ideas. It,
Yeah.
it's such a clever way of doing it.
Right.
You wanna make sure the audience understands that this is a character that doesn't fully understand yet, but does a little bit. And what a inventive way of doing it, of just kind of getting a snapshot of their brain as they're working through these two things, and knowing that they know that those two questions, or those two statements rather, are linked together in some way.
Yeah.
Genius stuff. I love it.
Yeah. Not wanting to process on any level the awareness of that connection, but
Mm-hmm.
nonetheless having it there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
yeah, she knows what her mom is talking about on some level. And also just like I think I hadn't even necessarily like thought about the phrase "I worry an awful lot about you." I hadn't really thought about it that hard until the text drew attention to it this way, and then it makes you realize it's like, oh, what he's really saying is like, I think about you an awful lot, Bev.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like too much. like
Yeah. And again,
um
the question is, what is it that you're worried about?
yeah, yeah.
Um, and there's no answer. There's no answer to that yet, but it's ominous, and Bev is connecting that in her mind to her mother's very worrisome question.
Yeah. There's
I mean,
another.
just the fact that her mother asks that question says an awful lot about what their home life is, right?
Yeah.
We've only seen a little bit of it, and a lot of what we've seen of his behavior has been creepy, has been off-putting, but it hasn't been direct. It's been very indirect, and yet it's enough that she is thinking about this thing too. That
Yeah.
Bev's mom is.
We don't know much about her at all.
Yeah.
Her mom, I mean. And I was wondering, like, what if Bev had said yes? Like would her mom leave with her, or what? And
Yeah.
I
No,
yeah,
that's a good
again,
point.
I don't know. We had a lot of book ahead of us, so I don't know exactly what sort of arc we're plotting out ahead of us. But I guess I should just phrase that as a question. I don't
Mhm.
know what she would have done, but it is. I guess it's better that she asked than just silently worry and never ask and let it happen if it's going to happen.
Yeah, no, I mean that's certainly fair. Um,
Yeah,
well, we'll see. We'll see. We're
yeah,
not done with this. I think I can say that.
yeah, yeah,
So alone, Bev confirms that the bathroom is still covered in blood, and then gets the hell out of the house the second her chores are done. Once outside, she happens to bump into Eddie, Ben, and that non-loser Bradley Donovan, who are pitching pennies in an alleyway because it's the 1950s, and that's just what you do. You pitch pennies in an alleyway.
yeah. It's really fun. I've spent hours pitching pennies. I never actually pitched pennies. It sounds like the most mind. It sounds like something you would do if you were in prison. You had nothing better to do.
There's that Michael Jordan documentary that came out during the pandemic, The Last Dance.
Uh huh.
In one of the scenes, they're illustrating that Michael Jordan is a complete gambling addict because he starts Like there's like one of the security guards in the arena that he plays in, and he like challenges him to a penny pitching contest, basically, where they're just chucking pennies against the wall and the closest wins. And it's just like he's like trying to get the guy to bet money. It's like $5 a throw. It's really funny. I thought about that when I was reading that. It's like freaking millionaire Michael Jordan playing $5 penny throws against some random security guard.
At least give the guy an advantage. That's hilarious, and I never knew that. That's awesome.
So Bev plays and she beats the crap out of anyone. She's really good at this game, apparently. And for some reason that really sets off Bradley, and he not only accuses Bev of cheating, don't know how you do that at throwing pennies, but he also calls her mom a whore. And this is there's so much going on here, Matt. Again, the use of whore and Bev's reaction to it ties in back to the sexual stuff that we've been dealing with Bev from the beginning of the chapter, right? This stuff that she's not fully even understanding yet, but is here. And then also, we get to see Ben like kind of white knight here in a little bit. And like it's pretty clear that Bev could probably take care of herself, and Ben doesn't need to do that. But at the same time, like it's a great Ben moment too, because you're like, oh, this kid's changed. I don't think he would have done this the first time we met him. I don't think he would have stood up against someone. Like there's that moment where Bradley's like, you want to go? And Ben's basically like, yeah. And it's like, oh, look at him. He's grown so much. He's more confident. He's less afraid all the time. This is great.
I think Ben has become aware that he's actually, probably terrifying to go up against.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the text even points out to us that Ben has now, fought his bully to a stalemate twice, and that's going to make a guy feel tougher.
This little lisping kid is nothing compared to standing up against Henry Bowers himself.
Right. Yeah.
I'm really into this little bit. Like it's here where they're kind of confused as to why Bradley got so mad about this so quickly. And it's this really interesting thing where like there's nothing in here that says it, but you can kind of go, oh, it's just the Ka trying to get this kid away from them because he's not part of the group, you know? Like this idea, like here he is again. Like this is the second time we've seen this guy, and each time we've seen this guy, the text has been very clear and transparent that like he's not part of the group, and they know it. And it's like I think it's a perfect way to illustrate maybe Bradley's picking up on that same vibe, that he feels he's not as welcome here, that he's not a part of these people, and so he's already kind of agitated, and when he loses and embarrasses himself, especially to a girl, it just kind of sets him off in a way that you kind of wouldn't expect.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you said, primarily the part about him catching onto the vibe that he's not welcome, because it's true, right? I think they're all kind of waiting for him to leave, and even a kid is sensitive to that kind of thing. So yeah.
So Bev starts to tell the boys what happened with her sink when good old Stanley Ura shows up. Remember him, Matt? Remember this guy?
I love this guy. I've been waiting for him to show up. I was legitimately like, where's Stanley? Where's my boy?
And just to say something that I don't think we have quite said yet, Stan is just barely 11, which makes him the youngest member of the Losers. I think he actually might be a whole grade level below everyone else. I'm not 100% sure on that though. It is just interesting the way King, like, I love what he does with Stan. It's really fascinating stuff, because he both segments him off from the rest of the group really interestingly in that he's younger than everyone else, but also like I think it specifically says he's younger than them all, but he acts older than them all, but also that he's just a little bit different than everyone else, really. And so I think it is kind of carving him out in a way that's like, well, this is the Losers Club, but these are the losers that are going to return to Derry in the 80s. This one, he is a part of the group, but he's not anymore. And so we're going to take the time to kind of show the differences a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he also seems to clash more directly with the group than any of the other characters we've seen up to this point. He's arguing, he's Not that it's necessarily bad that he's arguing, but perhaps it's an argument that needed to happen, but it's definitely not. He's not on the same wavelength as the others. I don't remember any real arguments prior to this point with the other characters.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I agree with that, and we'll talk about that more when we get to his story and his reaction to his story. But I think you're right that like everyone else is much more willing to accept the stories that have happened to them and want to be active in doing something about it, and that's not Stanley.
Yeah, and also, like you pointed out, his non-childlike sort of fastidiousness sets him apart, not just behaviorally, but also psychologically. I think that
Hmm.
he has a more adult mindset, as we'll see later, and I think that maybe in some ways makes him not as well suited to be a paladin against the evil here, because he's just
Yeah,
not. He doesn't have that childlike purity, which is actually necessary.
yeah, no, I like that. I like that. So Bev tells her story now to Stanley too, and Ben decides that they should go check out the bathroom. As we've said previously, all of the kids are able to see the blood, and it's Stanley Uris who suggests the simple idea of, "Hey, let's clean it up." I really like this, Matt. I was thinking about this for a bit. King often does this thing where he will kind of introduce a character into a scene and then make them directly matter and impact the scene in some way. Like I mean, you think about how different this would have played out if, for example, Bev leaves her apartment, is walking around, and then bumps into Eddie and Ben and Bradley playing, but Stan is just also there from the beginning, right? He would have stood out a little bit less, but by having him like join the conversation late, also join the conversation right when Bev is about to begin her story, and then have him be the driving force behind the idea to clean up the bathroom. This simple idea, but this important thing that they do, and also provide the funds to wash the rags that they will use in the cleaning. We've managed to subtly but effectively emphasize his role and his inclusion in the group. Like it's a more pessimistic person or a negative person could be like, why the hell is Stanley here? Right? Like we see pretty good reasons for why the rest of them and the things that they're good at and the things that they do. We haven't seen a reason for Stan Uris yet. And so we're kind of showing one here. And by including him in this way, we've emphasized that and drawn more attention to it.
Yeah. Well, I like the idea of cleaning up the blood as a sort of great example of that straightening pictures in strange hotel rooms motif of just like the characters who are good, who are fundamentally the good guys, have this inclination toward fixing things that are broken, even if they
Yeah.
don't matter.
Hmm.
Um, like whereas in contrast, like uh, if you don't fix things that are broken and meaningless, then they just accumulate, and the entropic forces of the Crimson King win eventually, because you let all of this crap pile up and break around you, and you let the small wrongs slide until they turn into monsters. And so yeah, even a small gesture like suggesting the idea, and then like you said, paying for it. um I'm I, I want to keep track of how money is used, because um uh Eddie or Richie, sorry, wait,
Hmm.
Eddie or Richie, which one of them paid for the
It was
movie?
Richie. Yeah.
Richie paid for the movie. So like Richie's all sort of the heart in that sense, where he's paying for like entertainment and distraction and fun and bonding, and Stanley is paying for righting of wrongs, cleaning up messes, fixing what's broken. Two dots don't quite make a line, but I do think it's interesting to think these are kids, like they're literally putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to their like role in the group. Um,
Yeah. No, I like that idea a lot, especially because, money is not a thing that these kids have huge access to, right? The
right,
idea of the idea of Stan saying, "I've got 40 cents, that should be just enough for us to wash those rags." Um, that's not an insignificant amount of money for him.
right,
That's a fair amount of money, actually.
right, exactly. So yeah, I don't know that we're like doing a whole thing with money where every character is going to buy something and it's going to be a whole thing. I mean, heck, okay, while we're at it, uh, uh, Bill saves up all his money and he buys the bicycle, right?
Hmm.
Which is like this symbol of like uh striving toward adulthood and like claiming strength that is like actually beyond your abilities, but you're going to do it anyway, damn it. Like it's a
Yeah.
very heroic, Leonardo turtle sort of Bill thing to do. um I'm trying to remember. Yeah, like now that I've noticed this pattern, like I actually am beginning to think that King actually thought through, was like, okay, well, what a kid spends their money on says a lot about them. So what are the kids going to spend their money on? And,
Yeah.
that it makes sense.
No, you're right. I mean, I'll point out that the one thing we've seen um, Ben spend his money on so far is just candy, but
Hmm.
that could certainly change.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
No, I like this. I like this. Well, let's keep an eye on this for sure.
Cool.
I really liked what you said also about possibly insignificant but still important decision. Like I think that lines up perfectly with this one quote here, where it says as they're kind of washing the rags after finishing up, it says they had done something about it. That seemed to be the important part. Maybe it hadn't worked completely, but she discovered it had worked well enough to give her heart peace. Which is great, that we're talking about power again. The dam that they all built. This idea of something bad happened, something scary happened, and we did something. And even if it didn't matter ultimately in the end, in like a broader, larger sense, it had power behind it still.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. Yeah.
So while waiting for the rest of the wash, the conversation turns to Bev's story, with Ben saying she's not alone, that they've seen stuff too. Ben and Eddie share their stories as well as sharing Bill's photo album story, and they haven't talked with Bill and Richie in a while, but it's gonna be some updated stories for them too there for sure.
For sure. Yeah, that's going to be good.
But then we turn to Stan, who has obviously experienced something, but was saved by the Irish cop last time, and is still, as we see here, very, very hesitant to say anything. For a bit, we think Stan's going to dodge the story again, right? I think there's this wonderful moment where, like, right as he's about to start talking, the clothes washer goes off, and he's like, "Oh, clothes are ready," and you're like, "Damn it, Stanley!"
Yeah.
But then he puts them into the dryer, and there's this moment of pause where they pressure him again, and he actually decides to go into it. But before we get into Stan's story proper, we need a quick primer on what the standpipe is. And Matt, as we said in the intro, you get it now, right? It's a
Yeah.
pipe.
Yeah, it's just a big fat water tower.
Yeah,
Instead of being like really tall, it's just big.
yeah,
Um, and of
and
course, it's water related,
yeah,
obviously.
yeah. So the kids know the standpipe by its reputation, being a place that was, for some inexplicable reason, not locked, because there's a walkway over the top of the water tank, and the walkway is high enough above the tank where if you fall off of it into the water, you have nothing to grab onto and will eventually drown. And I think it is the biggest condemnation of perhaps the 1950s as a whole, or more specifically Derry, that it took more than one kid drowning in this thing before they said, "Hey, we should lock the door."
Uh-huh. Yeah, not even install a ladder or something, just lock the door,
Yeah.
just like the minimum, because somebody could just forget to lock the door, right? It's not
Uh-huh.
like it's an actual
Yeah.
safety precaution like putting a net or taking down the walkway, because why would you even need that? Um yeah. No, I agree. It's a great symbol of the kind of negligence of just like, it's like if you heard about a kid falling into a well and then you just like didn't cover up the well, or fill in the well. You just covered up the well with another rotten, wooden plank that's going to rot after a few years, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah, it also makes me want to teach my kids water survival skills after hearing this story, because the kids might have survived if they'd known how to tie. To take off their shirt and to tie the sleeves shut and then to inflate the shirt into like a really, really shitty life preserver. In retrospect, I'm less than totally confident that this would have actually worked, but I guess it's better than nothing.
Hey, now I did that. I had to do that with jeans. We had to do jump in water with jeans and a t-shirt, and then you can make the jeans into a life preserver too.
Yeah, I had to do that.
I mean, I floated on it.
I floated for a second, and then they were like, "Good job, you did it." And then I was done, and I didn't wait to see how quickly the air would have just come out through the denim, which is not neither water nor airproof.
Just put more in there. It'll be fine.
I guess. Or you can just float on your back. That always works.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the honest truth is, A, probably we're just panicking, and B, scary clown monster.
Scary clown monster. 100% they were actually killed by the scary clown monster.
So Stan's story takes place there at the standpipe. Well, at first it takes place at Memorial Park, right next to the standpipe, where a bird bath was placed. You see, Matt, Stan is a dork. A birder. And his dad had caught wind that there's possibly a cardinal hanging out at that bird bath at that park. And so Stan went to check it out to see. There's this actually fun fact, Matt, that this used to be the statue of a Union soldier for like a Civil War memorial, but the statue blew down one day, and then they just never bothered to replace the statue. So they just put a bird bath there.
I mean, a couple fun things about that. First of all, the fact that it's specifically a Union soldier fell down. They just said, "Screw it, forget about it. Doesn't matter."
Well, it's Maine, so I just assumed it was a Union soldier.
Well, okay, let's just assume that it is a Union soldier. We're about to be confronted with mega racism shortly. So, like, the idea of we were honoring this soldier, and now forget about it. Doesn't matter. It's not important. And then they replace it with a water feature, basically. It's bird bath, water.
No,
again,
and
water.
Water's evil. Yeah, evil water.
Right.
So another fun thing about this, Matt, is that Stanley looks at the bird bath and notes that it has a Latin quote on it from Pliny. And okay, I don't speak Latin, so here we go. Aperibat eidolon senex. I looked this up, and first of all, I don't think eidolon is a Latin word.
Is it not? I mean, we know that it means
Greek. I think it's a Greek word that has become an English word.
Yeah, which means like ghost or
phantom. Yeah,
which we know from other things, but
but like a parabat means appeared, and senex means old man. So it's basically like a ghost appeared in the form of an old man, or like a phantom of an old man appeared. Which, is funny. Like, I guess this was there for the Union soldier, and then they just left it when the thing flew over, and now it's just on a bird bath inexplicably.
Yeah, that's the only thing that makes sense, right? And it may. I mean, I guess it ends up being almost funny, where it's like you just left the inscription and then replaced the thing that it was describing, and it's just a kind of laziness and neglect.
Yeah,
that it's simultaneously funny and like a genius way of expressing how nobody gives a shit in Derry.
Yeah.
Aperibat, third person singular imperfect active indicative of apero. I love Latin.
Basically, there appeared a ghost of an old man.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Which, I mean, I barely even makes sense for a thing that you would put at a war memorial. Like, why?
Yeah.
Like, what does that mean? I mean, I haven't read the Latin, I think, books that Pliny wrote that this is from, so I had no idea what the context is in that regard. But I don't know. It was like very fascinating going down this thing. I think it's just, honestly, sometimes I think Stephen King is just like, that's creepy.
Yeah.
And so he threw it in.
Yeah. I mean, he probably knows that eidolon means phantom, and we're about to have a literal phantom show up in like
Yeah.
5 seconds. So
Yeah. I think
yeah,
that's about as far as he went with this one for sure.
yeah, yeah.
So the important part about this early part of the story, though, Matt, is that we are finally learning some key stuff about Stanley. Despite being the youngest of the Losers Club, as we said, he acts old for his age. I love the text here where it says, fastidious boy, patient boy. He did not fidget. He did not get up and walk around or swing the binoculars here and there to see what else there might be seen. He sat still, field glasses trained on the bird bath, and the mist collected in fat drops on his yellow slicker. Um, Love this. Love this is really starting to understand who Stan Uris is.
Yeah, no, it's delightful. I agree. Yeah. I mean, I want to say I am still sad about Stanley's death. I really actually did fall in love with his character and, his relationship with his wife during the brief time that he was in the book all those weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And like getting back to his character now, I'm just reminded of like how sad it is knowing what's going to happen to him. And it's just such a great, it's such a great story choice to kill him off before you introduce him in that special way that works, and you have a time skip back and forth book like this.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. All right, so here we go. Stan sees a ton of birds, but not the one he was looking for. And just as he's about to pack up to go home, he hears a loud slam, and that scares the birds away. As he is walking out of the park by the Derry standpipe, he notices that the door has somehow swung open, which, to your point, Matt, lock, not a good solution.
Uh-huh. That's a
And of
good point. Yeah.
course, like a kid, he goes to investigate what's going on here. And Matt, I don't want to feel like a broken record too much here, but this scene absolutely terrified me too. Did this work on you? Were you sufficiently creeped out at this whole standpipe scene?
For once, I was actually in a dark house alone while listening to this part of the book, and yes, it did
Oh my
indeed work on
gosh.
me. Yes.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
So Stan peers inside the standpipe, seeing the stairs climbing up to the top of the tank, and then he starts to hear gallopy music, and he smells the smells of a carnival. And in spite of himself, Stan feels himself drawn towards that sound, towards the sound of the carnival, walking slowly up the stairs. I really love a little bit later where he thinks he's only gone up like a few stairs, but like in his kind of hypnotism here, he's gone up over a dozen. He's like halfway up already. Really, really love that touch.
Yeah. No, I agree. That was there's just it's just so much in here that is perfect and delightful. It's funny because some of it reminded me of the Magnus Archives, and then I was like, "Get that backwards, Matt." The Magnus Archives was almost certainly riffing on this exact scene for some of the stuff. Magnus Archives is a horror podcast that Scott and I have listened to, and I just well, it was just incredibly good, like creepy horror, which I think is my personal preference of like horror in terms of what, because like you never really quite see exactly. Well, that's not true. You do kind of see it at the end, but
Kind of do, but
you
that's the least scary part. Like
yeah,
the most scary part is the sound, right?
yeah,
That he feels the sound of squishing,
squishing,
which he says sounds like someone walking in wet rubber boots or something.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
oh,
Such a good
yeah.
word, squishing. Yeah,
Yeah. The squishing of the wet feet climbing down the stairs towards him, the shadows bobbing on the wall above him, the smells changing from smells of carnivals to smells of death and rot. It's all so good.
it's wonderful. I love it.
He runs down the stairs, but finds the door to the standpipe slammed shut in front of him. He can't reopen it. Something is pushing against it from the outside as the squishy sounds start to come closer and closer. And then he calls out who is there, and they respond. It said, "The dead ones, Stanley. We're the dead ones. We sank, but now we float, and you'll float too." Matt, we haven't actually talked about this yet. You know, like the refrain of floating has been a constant one throughout all of these experiences, right? You know, like from the beginning, from Georgie, the idea of we float, we all float, and you'll float too has been a constant. So what do you What do you think this means? Why do they keep saying this? What do you think?
I mean, I think I this is actually a delightful moment in the book for me because I got where we were going a half second before it happened because he said, first of all, audiobook voice actor, amazing job on this dead kid voice, the dead one, Stanley. It's just so good.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
it's better than what I just did. It's fantastic. It's like burbling somehow. Anyway, he says we sank, and I was like, I get it. He's gonna say, and now we float. And the thing is, Stephen King has done a magic trick on us because they don't float like balloons; they float like corpses, because that's what they are. They're corpses. They're floating, and that's why the bodies disappear. Pennywise probably has a lagoon full of floating dead children somewhere under the city. But like, I love it because the first time we hear float, we hear Pennywise say, "We all float down here." And he's got the balloon, and he's a clown, and you're thinking, "Oh, floating, like
Yeah.
floating in the air." That's what the child thinks. You're gonna, float around in the air, like in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, um, like a balloon. And then it's like, no, you're gonna float face down in the water, like a waterlogged dead body. That's how you're gonna float, actually. And it didn't click for me until like a nanosecond before he actually makes the connection. And I was like, oh, Jesus, that's so good. I love
I
it.
love it.
Yeah.
No, that's great. That's fantastic. I'm glad you came to that conclusion.
Just in the nick of time. Yeah.
So we see here in a moment of inspiration that comes from somewhere, Stanley pulls out his bird book and holds it in front of him, screaming the names of the birds and thus boring Pennywise to death. The end. End of book.
Yeah.
In all seriousness, though, like the sneezing powder and the Irish cop voice of Richie, Stanley's birding book seems to neutralize it. The dead boys stop squish walking, and the door to the standpipe suddenly swings open. Stan escapes for now, but we're reinforcing the idea that we've already kind of presented with the Richie encounter here, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's this trope of, the creature's weakened when people are not afraid of him, or when they make light of him. Yeah, right.
I do think it was really interesting the way King did this. We kind of talked about this last week where he throws this random thing in about Richie's dad of like, he was this height and this age and would die of cancer in 1973 or something. And then it does the same thing with Stanley here, where it says like in Stanley's moment of triumph of escaping from it, it's like, and Stanley, who would open up crosses on his wrists in a bathtub in 1985, escaped, crawled out of the standpipe and escaped.
Yeah.
It's like, fuck you,
yeah.
Steven. I mean, I get it, right? He wants to remind us. He doesn't want us to forget that is Stanley's fate. That is what's going to happen to him, especially because at the end of the story, we do move into what I think is kind of the book giving us the explanation for why Stanley couldn't handle it.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. I totally agree. I mean, it's entirely possible. You and I are reading this at a level of kind of attentiveness that is unusual. I can imagine if I were just blitzing through this book, literally forgetting which kid was who. Losing track of the fact that Stanley was the guy who killed himself 5,000 pages ago.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
So just literally functionally reminding you. But also, no, I mean, it also is this kind of macabre, like popping of a balloon, where you're like, oh, yeah, I guess I can't feel too good about this, huh?
Yeah. So they all believe Stanley's story right away, of course, and decide that they need to do something. They talk about going to the police, but kind of realize that might not be what is possible. I think that basically they decide that the one thing they need to do is talk to Bill because Bill will know what to do. Stanley, though, as you said earlier, is pretty resistant to that idea, is incredibly disturbed by doing that. He doesn't want to act on what he's seen. He doesn't want to do anything. He just wants to pretend it was a dream and then just kind of move on with his life. And this, as we said, I think is where we get to see this moment of that this encounter didn't just scare Stanley, it, quote, offended him. And I want to read
Mhm.
this, and then we can talk about that concept of offense. You can live with fear, I think Stan would have said if he could. Maybe not forever, but for a long time. It's offense maybe you can't live with because it opens up a crack inside your thinking. And if you look down into it, you see there are living things down there, and they have little yellow eyes that don't blink. And there's a stink down in the dark. And after a while, you think there's a whole universe down there, a universe where a square moon rises in the sky and the stars laugh in cold voices, and some of the triangles have four sides and some have five, and some of them have five raised to the fifth power of sides. In this universe there might grow roses which sing. Everything leads to everything, he would have told them if he could. Go to your church and listen to your stories about Jesus walk on water, but if I saw a guy doing that, I'd scream and scream and scream, because it wouldn't look like a miracle to me. It would look like an offense. I love this so much. I love this concept. It's so cool.
Yeah. It's great. I mean, it's a delightful Lovecraft homage, I think,
Mhm,
because it's
mhm.
this idea that you don't really wanna know what's out there in the dark because, it'll drive you mad. And of course, yeah, like you pointed out a second ago, the fact that it's Stanley having this thought, he is the most adult of them psychologically. It's a very adult thought. The
Yeah.
idea that the universe should have to like hang together and make sense is a kind of adult thought. A kid, much like last week, where Richie is more or less just like, yeah, whatever. Is
Yeah, yeah, they're ghosts. Of course they're ghosts. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Like if you have the maturity to realize that if you allow demon clowns into your worldview, then it kind of implies a lot of other unfathomably horrifying things. Then that leads to Lovecraftian madness for Stanley in a way that it doesn't lead to it for the other kids, I think.
Yeah. And the thing that I love about this is that sorry, Stan, this is the world you live in, right?
Hmm.
Like the idea that there are many worlds out there, right? I think the quote here about there might be roses which sing,
Huh.
um we we know that there are
Yeah.
in Stephen King's universe. There are. We know that. So yeah, this idea that like Stanley can't take the truth of the world, and you're right. Like to the extent that we talked about how an adult would react to learning that the world is not the way he thought it was, is something that Stanley couldn't handle when he was a child, where the rest of them could, and
Yeah.
so certainly couldn't handle it again 27 years later, where he's once again reminded of this thing.
Yeah. And presumably worse things happen to him after this point in the story.
Yeah.
Um, I do want to mention like the mention of the rose which sings. I just because this is Kingslingers, a Dark Tower podcast. Where does this book fall in terms of the writing of the Dark Tower?
This is, I believe, after the drawing of the three. Um,
Okay.
let's see. Let's make sure. Yeah, the Wasteland. No, sorry, I missed. This is after the Gunslinger, but prior to both the Drawing of the Three and the Wastelands. Drawing of the Three came out in '87. Wastelands came out in '91. I believe it is not until the Wastelands that we get the rose in the lot.
Okay.
Because I think
Yeah.
it's when Jake finds the rose in the lot, I believe.
Yeah, that's basically what I was getting at is, this definitely precedes any mention of the rose, or the field of roses for that matter.
Hmm.
So that's just interesting that he took this symbol sort of from himself, uh, in it, or possibly, probably.
Yeah, I mean that is, I mean that is kind of it's something that King has always done, and he's always been like kind of reflecting and responding to his own ideas. And that one thing I love about the Dark Tower is how that is how he kind of literalizes that in the idea of the Song of the Turtle, right? That like the Song of Gan, that like he's hearing this song in his head constantly, and even when he's not writing Dark Tower novels, he is still channeling that idea. um
Yeah.
and so here it is poking its head up in it, before it has actually been established in the Dark Tower mythos at all.
I love that it's literally in this universe there might grow roses which sing. Everything leads to everything,
Hmm.
which is like that's like the Dark Tower.
That is exactly the Dark Tower. Yes.
The rose and the connection of everything to everything. Yeah, that's really an amazing find right
Hmm.
there. I love it.
I mean, like, I think to be a bit more boring about it, is very possible that, like, while he's working on this book, he's also like working on a draft of what will eventually become Drawing of the Three in the Wastelands. And so the ideas are just in his head as he's doing this.
Yeah, sure, and uh, that's the creative process. So
Or it's the song of a mystical beast
yeah,
channeling the most important stories of our
yeah,
universe
yeah,
through the author.
and the literal rose does exist in a vacant lot,
Yeah.
and because I mean, yeah, we
Which
know
one
that
do
it
you
does.
like better?
Yeah, right. I like whichever one it is that I just get to live a sort of normal life and never have to encounter a Lovecraftian clown creature.
Yeah. No, I agree. So the kids split up. The kids split up for the day, and Bev goes home and decides to fuck around with the scary monster Blooded Drain again because kids, you
Uh-huh.
know?
Yeah.
Um, so she
Yeah.
grabs her dad's tape measure, and Matt, this might be the only time I'm on Team Al here because you don't you don't fuck around with a man's tape measure, okay? You
Yeah.
don't do it.
It's never where I left it.
Yeah.
Somebody always moves it.
I can't tell you how many of my father's tape measures I broke as a child. Because there are two things every human being on this planet has done with the tape measure. Number one, pull it all the way out until the end,
Uh-huh.
and then release the lock and have it go slurp back up into the thing.
Yep.
And number two is pull it out and see how far you can get it before it succumbs to its weight and bends.
Uh-huh. Yep. Of
Every
course.
single human being has done that. That
Yeah.
has held a tape measure.
Yeah. That's the great thing about being an adult is there's nobody around to stop you from doing that.
Yeah.
Um
Oh, I was literally doing that today because I had to get a tape measure out to measure a spot in my son's room because we're getting him a new bookshelf.
mhm.
And then I proceeded to play with it, and then thusly showed him how to play with
Yeah.
it because he was
Right.
watching me.
And then he's like, I want that. And you're like, when you're older, son.
Or when I'm not looking, because that's
Yeah.
probably what's going to happen.
Do you ever feel like you're going to be horribly maimed by it, even though it's clearly just not a high power enough device to actually hurt a human?
Oh yeah, I mean that thing comes like screaming back into the thing when you're all the way out to like 18 feet and let it go.
I guess. I mean, I
I don't
always
think it
feel
could ever hurt you, but
like I always feel like it's going to hurt me, but I'm like, I know it's probably not, right?
you know what
It's
it could
probably,
definitely do though? Break the little nub at the end that stops it from going all the way up into the device and thus
uh-huh,
breaking it, and then your dad gets mad at you because you broke his tape measure.
uh-huh.
Not that I'm
Right,
speaking from experience or anything.
right. I guess if you had your finger like right there when it slammed back in, it could hurt. Yeah, sure.
I
Okay.
mean, I don't like it would hurt, but like I don't think it would injure you.
True. Right, yeah, I think you're right.
But anyway, Bev decides to risk it all and play with the tape measure. She sticks it down the drain and feeds it down, down, down until something grabs it and pulls it all the way out to the very end. Then suddenly it retracts, and all the hard work to get the blood off of everything is gone. As 6 feet or more of blood come up with this tape measure, again with some more threats from Pennywise down there along with it. Our chapter ends with Bev frantically cleaning the tape measure and the bathroom again, and then burning the two rags that she used to do so.
What an interesting number one. So many metaphors.
Oh my
Um,
god, yeah.
but like also just the idea that she can't help herself. She goes back alone, and then she has to clean it again. And then instead of having the option uh of washing the rags, which is what she did with the group, now she's alone, and instead she just burns the rags, which is a lot more sort of some collateral damage incurred from her choice. So it's I guess what I see this as doing is saying that when they're a group, they're able to handle it, they're able to fix it. But when they're alone, they're vulnerable, and they're just more prone to making mistakes. You could
Yeah.
say.
No, I like that. I like that. I think there's also, to me, a lot more, period imagery there again of
Yeah.
trying to destroy the evidence. But also just the idea of, we joked around about her, feeling this need to go back and fuck with the drain again. To our period metaphor, this is like, doesn't stop. Periods don't stop just because you managed to hide the evidence of the first one, right? Like, this is
Yeah.
a part of your life now. This is not going away. And so this, I like this idea that like it's gonna come back. Like, you can clean it up and destroy the evidence as much as possible, but it's gonna come back.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so that is the end of our first chapter. We spent a long time on that one, Matt, but it was a really, really good one.
Yeah, I mean, there's like we kind of said a minute ago, sort of introducing two characters in a certain regard.
So from here, we move into Derry, the second interlude. This, as it is a new section of the book, has a couple of quotes. One is just a quote from Harvey Keitel in Martin Scorsese's Mean Streets. It just says, "You don't fuck around with the infinite," which is delightful. I love it so much. The other is another piece of Latin, Matt. Once again, I do not speak Latin, but I do know that this quote comes from Virgil's The Aeneid, a poem that I've read and quite enjoyed. But I'm not going to bother to read the Latin because I will just absolutely butcher it. But translated, it says, "And those terrible things I saw, and in which I played a great part." What
Which
do you think about that?
I think it fits with the story we're about to hear from the elder Mr. Mike's dad.
Yeah, he had a part in the black spot, not in the burning of it, of course, but in
he had a
constructing of it, and in the
he had a
he
role in
was
the story.
in there. Yeah.
And he pointed a gun at a man's head at one point too. So
He did do that. All right. It's another interlude, Matt, which means we're back with grown-up Mike Hanlon in his epistolary journal. Here we are again.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I love it when King decides that we're just going to do a short story now,
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So we begin in mid-February as Mike is still debating calling the rest of the losers or not. We know he eventually does in May, I believe it is, but he has not done so yet. But so he's still got a few more months until he's going to work up the courage to do that. 2 more kids have gone missing, but there is a plausible, though highly doubtful, reason for one of them. So Mike can't quite pull the trigger on calling the rest of the club yet. One thing to point out here in his writing, especially early on here, is just how kind of unhinged his writings get. Like, Mike is not doing well, and we can see that in how he writes. We're kind of witnessing him deteriorate on the page. His brain kind of jumps around between moments. He's not only writing these facts, but then like later coming back and saying, "I just reread what I wrote, and wow." Or it caused me to break down because it's the first time I thought about my dad in so many years. Like, he's just having a really bad time of it right now.
Yeah, well, and he seems to be like staying up all night, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Too. Like, that's not helping.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you understand that like he will call them if he has to, but he really, really doesn't want to, and the tension is driving him crazy.
Yep. Eventually, Mike gets to the fire at the black spot, which is, I think, kind of like the main subject of this week's interlude. But before we get to the fire itself, Mike helps us understand what it was like to be a black man in Derry in 1930. And he does this through his father, who was a black man in Derry in 1930. He was a soldier and a member of E Company, the all-black company stationed at the Derry base at that time. The first story we see here before we get to the fire itself is of a racist sergeant forcing Private Hanlon to dig and undig holes in the dirt all night long for no reason at all. This is one of those, I think, perfect stories, Matt, where you read this and just kind of go, this can't, there's no way you could treat people like this and get away with it. But of course, it is part of the story that this sergeant did get away with it and didn't get in trouble at all. And that's the point, right? The point is that, yes, you could absolutely get away with this at this time.
Yeah. I mean, I think King is doing a lot of work to make sure your blood is boiling at the injustice of all of this. And this is just like the prelude building up toward the real, like, this is almost just a guy venting his frustration, like harmlessly, I'm doing air quotes, relative to what's going to happen later.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the question Mike has for his dad after hearing the story, and it's frankly a good one, is why did you come back to live in Derry then, Dad? If this place sucks so much, and it's a question that has some pretty fascinating answers here, Matt. I think Hanlon here says that, while it is true that evil things manage to take root in Derry very well, there's something about the soil here. He says that where things can take root here, including we see the Legion of White Decency, which is basically the northern equivalent of the Ku Klux Klan. While those things have success in Derry, there are some shockingly good people here too, and it's these people that Mike's dad kind of fell in love with, this part of the town. I think we can see that you can draw a line between Adrian Mellon and Hanlon here, right? A person who is ostracized and persecuted by a community, but can't help but also seeing the positive sides of that,
Yeah.
and that is what Mike, or what Will Hanlon sees here.
Yeah. No, that's great. It really reminds me of Adrian Mellon, like really legitimately falling in love with Derry and his boyfriend being like, "Can't you see that this place sucks?" And him just being like, "No, I love it."
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
sorry,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say that I agree. There's something important to the idea that he could have just left and never come back.
Yeah,
Would have been the easiest thing in the world to just never come back. But I think there's also a part of him that feels like he can't abandon this place to the evils that he knows reside there.
that is a great point. And that is, I think, what the other part of this thing, that's something that Mike kind of verbalizes here. It says, "But as he told me that night when I was 11, the thought of Derry never escaped his mind. And now I wonder if that blind thing might not have been at work even then, drawing him back so I could take my place in that circle in the Barrens that August evening. If the wheels of the universe are untrue, then good always compensates for evil. But good can be awful as well." So obviously this is Ka, right? This is a thing that we've seen again and again and again as we've read books in the King universe. This idea that that things are moved, that people are moved, that pieces are pushed on a chessboard into the place they need to be. But I really like this idea. I like this idea of that in King's universe, the places that have some of the most concentrated evil, also consequently must have some of the most concentration of good, right? That if the universe is going to stay in true, which it seems like it wants to, um, then that has to be true, and it's
Mhm.
because of people like Will Hanlon that end up coming to this place. It's because of people like, hey, guess who we're about to see again? We're about to see a good old friend of ours.
Yeah,
We're about to see Dick Halloran again, and here he is at another place of great evil, but he is a person of great good, right?
yeah,
This is how King's universe works. And so it makes total sense in this universe that Derry would be this place where terrible, terrible, terrible things like the Legion of White Decency can exist and be successful and grow, but also that there can be just a whole mess of really great, wonderful people of the white.
yeah, yeah. These soldiers of the white. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's that's great. Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's very much using even some of the same language of Ka, talking about wheels, right?
Yep. Yep.
The wheels of the universe. Ka is a wheel. Um, I don't remember them saying Ka at any point in this book
They do
yet.
not. No.
Okay, yeah. So,
At least
but
at least not yet. Yeah.
yeah, but it's the basic idea is cropping up quite a bit here.
Hmm.
So yeah,
And the idea that good in its quest to do good can be brutal
yes,
and
that's
cruel.
that is certainly one of the key features of Ka. Yes,
Yeah.
that there's a mercilessness to the turning of those wheels for sure.
Hmm. Yep. So the elder Hanlon continues to tell the story of him moving to Derry. We see here, including him buying their farm in the 1930s and how they were hassled by some of the white folks in town that didn't want them here, including we see here good old Henry Bowers' dad. Hooray! It's a just paying it forward with the Bowers. I will say, how delightful is the story of him getting one over on Bauer Senior, right? I like,
Mhm.
it's just laying the seeds for more problems to come, but like, it's what a delightful moment where you can just
Yeah.
feel good about yourself when he just like completely puts a stop to all that right then.
Yeah, yeah, super satisfying. There's something incredibly badass about the idea that he has like this rifle and he sets the butt of it against his belt buckle and then he puts the other end against the guy's chin because it gives
Yeah.
you this impression of like I'm preparing for the recoil when I pull the trigger.
Uh-huh.
Which is it like I don't know, there's something like that's just incredibly serious and badass about that.
Yep.
Um I love it.
Finally, though, we work up to the story of the fire at the black spot. But we see here, Matt, not until years later when Mike's father is in the hospital dying of cancer. Mike is 15. So we know that this is after the events of the summer of 1958 that we are experiencing right now with our characters. Mike is visiting his father in the hospital each night, still kind of haunted by whatever he experienced those years ago, still kind of riding his bike against the horrors that he saw that summer.
Mhm. Yeah. I love that the story is spread out over the course of Mike's childhood, where
Yeah.
it's a short story that it's simultaneously the story that his father is telling, and then it's also encompassed in this wraparound story of Mike's childhood over the course of many years living in Derry.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. Um, so we talked about this in Night Shift, Matt, but I'm gonna just say it again here to remind our audience. King lost his mother to cancer, and so when he writes scenes like this, where children are kind of forced to watch and experience their parents die to cancer, it always feels like intensely personal and emotional on a level kind of above a lot of the other horrifying scenes he writes. This scene is no different to me. Like I really love this paragraph here. We never spoke of the cancer, and in some of those silences, I thought that we must speak of it, that there would be nothing else, and we would be stuck with it like kids caught without a place to sit in a game of musical chairs when the piano stops. And I would have become almost frantic, trying to think of something, anything to say, so that we would not have to acknowledge this thing that was now destroying my daddy. I
Mm.
God, that is like I really think something like that, writing like that, can only come from experience. Like,
Yeah.
feels like this is something that he acutely experienced himself and transposed it here to the page.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you just said, we talked about this in Night Shift, and it reminds me very much of the ideas that were discussed in that particular short story in that collection. Um,
Hmm.
yeah.
So in this game of chicken, Mike brings up the black spot again, and his father decides that he's old enough to finally hear the full tale of the fire. And Matt, before we go into it, before we really get into the black spot story itself, I just want to say, like, I know we've kind of said this already. I'm going to emphasize it again here. You could completely rip this part out of the book, these 20 pages, rip it out of the book, drop it into a short story collection, and it would work on its own, basically without any alteration. I think the only thing you'd have to probably cut out is the Pennywise reference at the very end of the story. But it's that good, right? It's just fully functions as a completely independent story all on its own, and it's uh, uh, wonderful. Um,
Mhm.
it's some of the best King writing I've experienced. I love the story. It's got everything I love about King in it. Really.
Yeah, 100%. It's a brilliant short story by itself. I love that he does this. Like it's really grown on me. Not that I already liked it going into this project, studying King, but like he has made me think like this is the way to do it, man. This is the way
Mhm.
to
Yeah.
do storytelling, especially for like a long novel. It's like, yeah, it's just you break up that journey into these bits where you tell these little self-contained stories, and it's just so much
Yeah.
more fun and satisfying that way.
Yep. Yep. So William Hanlon tells the story of the Black Spot, the old tin shed that the company E-Boys converted into a bar slash nightclub when they were kicked out of all of the other bars in Derry for being black. So before they build the spot itself, I want to kind of talk about some of the stories we see of the company E-Boys kind of interacting with the massive part French lagers that exist in this town. There's this particular moment I'm thinking of where a giant guy walks up to William and basically says, "Are you in less kind language, asks if he's a black man. Um, and it's really fascinating to me because like I think we're kind of primed for this giant man walking up to Will asking him this question for this interaction to go like super super bad. But it doesn't. The guy's just like, "Hey, I've never seen a black person before. Let me buy you a beer." And it's this moment where Will says, "You're the first white person that's ever bought me a beer." And you're just like, wow. Like
Yeah.
I don't know why what like that obviously true but simple fact of nobody besides someone of my race has ever bought me a drink before in my life just makes you go like, oh holy shit.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That's a very poignant idea right there.
Yeah.
And I guess I don't know, the there's something about the fact that the guy who offered him the beer was not someone from Derry. For me, somehow reinforces the idea that there's something particularly bad about this place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, like because no white person from Derry would have made that gesture. It's just
Yeah.
not that
No,
kind
I
of
think you're
place.
right. Yeah. But of course, Matt, we learn that the locals in town didn't like these black boys hanging out at their bars, even though the people that were complaining weren't actually the ones going to the bars. Which is, I'm glad King included that detail into it. You know, it just draws the absurdity of this whole situation. You know, we don't want you in our bars that we don't go to.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Just the idea that there are people having fun somewhere else
yeah.
is just driving them crazy. Yeah,
Yep. Yep. So the kind of one of the leaders of the town goes to the base commander and basically demands that they ban them from their bars, and he does it. And then in to give them somewhere to go, he gives them an old shed to call their own. Terrible, miskept old shed. The shed, by the way, the black spot, we're told sits on Memorial Park, the place where earlier last chapter Stan went bird watching and had his encounter at the standpipe. So it's a fun little connection for you there.
yeah, I like that.
So the company E-Boys are all pretty mad about being kicked out of the bars and given this dump in front of them, but that's when one of them, Private Dick Halloran, suggests that they can fix the place up. And that's exactly what they do. Matt, okay. So
Uh-huh.
we've talked for hours about all the various connections amongst the Stephen King universe and we've talked about, you know, like stuff like Black House where we didn't like it as much when it's, you know, this kind of direct kind of thing that the end of that story ended up being.
Yeah,
Um this is one of those moments that I do really like it because it's just like, hey, look,
yeah,
here's this guy. You know him.
yeah,
He's here too.
yeah.
And that's it.
It's just the right amount. It's
Yeah.
just the right amount. It's and he serves a narrative function,
Mm-hmm.
and then he's gone.
Yeah.
And I actually will say, not only did I like not mind this, but I actually love this. I'm gonna jump slightly ahead and just say like I was surprisingly affected by the fact that it's him who basically saves them. And
Uh-huh.
it's because in my head I'm like, it's because he has the shining and he knows that that they'll all die if they go that way.
Yep. Yep.
And
Isn't
this
it
book
great that
never.
the book can't say that? They
Yeah,
can't say that, and yet you kind of know it.
yeah, yeah. And this book certainly can't say that. This book doesn't even hint it. This book doesn't even say like, you know, he. It doesn't even you like that. That's the kind of Easter egg where I'm like, that man. I actually love this. Like, and I don't know why exactly. I guess it's just like, I don't know. You like to see Dick. He's a character you liked. You admired him. It doesn't feel like it's just a reference for its own sake. It feels like it really makes sense, and that you're actually learning something about Dick Halloran, what he did when he was younger. He was involved in this horrible incident. Goes perfectly with who his character is, by the way. Like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Oh
that's
yeah.
another element where it actually brings a little bit of enrichment to Dick Halloran as a character to think like, oh, that he went through this kind of thing too, in addition to everything else.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's great. Love it.
I agree. The only thing it's missing is Dick kind of in the middle of the hopping club saying, "Did anyone just peel an orange?"
Yeah.
Um, I would have hated that, but no, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. It's fun. It's not. It doesn't overpower the book. It doesn't make the entire book about a connection to another book. It's just, he's writing. He's writing about this black spot stuff. He has this other black character that he knows time wise would, I think, kind of slot perfectly. And he goes, "Yeah, I'm gonna throw him in here.
Yeah.
We're gonna see good old Dick again." Um,
Yeah.
it's delightful.
Yeah, and if he's written the Gunslinger at this point, he's probably thinking more about his intertextuality um, stuff. So
Yeah, fair point. Fair point. Yeah, no,
cool.
definitely.
Yeah.
So we're not going to go over this in too much detail, Matt, but a lot of this chapter is dedicated to how Company E slowly transforms the Black Spot into a pretty great place, actually. Hard work, dedication, and passion for a place to call their own. They turn this place into a great joint, and so great actually that it starts attracting other people from town. Importantly, white people. And it's that growth that will, per will, cause them to get reckless, and which brings the legion of white decency down upon them, which leads to our horrible, horrible fire.
Yeah. I just want to say parenthetically, like I had indeed never heard of the Legion of White Decency. I'm kind of mad about it. Like, it seems important to know about this. Like, you're always seeing these assertions that like the South is like super racist and the KKK is from the South, and that's all true. But
Mm-hmm.
the North gets unfairly left out of the racism basket, and yeah, the North had this shit going on. So yeah,
Yeah, I did a little research on this, and I mean, there's like definitely like legions of decency that existed. This is like, this is a group that like, was it real or was it like myth, or I don't,
oh
we don't
okay.
fully know, but there
This
was a
isn't
group called that.
necessarily history then.
I mean, I mean, there was definitely like a group called the Legion of White Decency that was founded in Philadelphia at about this time that would line up with what we're saying here. But like, was it a big, huge, large enough organization to have many chapters? Like to basically be the KKK of the North? Um, yeah, maybe. But
Hmm.
I think your point still stands here. This idea that like we we make a lot of assumptions about racism, and especially post Civil War racism, and be like, the South was bad, they had all the racists, the North, they were the good guys, and they didn't, there were no racists there, which is obviously absurd and untrue.
Yeah, well, no, I mean I appreciate you sort of corrected me on this, because I just literally was like, "Oh, Stephen King is telling me a historical thing I didn't know about," and it turns
I mean,
out that's
he
okay.
is just not like.
It's not as ironclad as the text here makes it seem, though.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
okay, okay,
Um,
all right,
I don't want to like sit here and say the thing didn't exist, because it did. But the point here is that this place sucks.
yeah, yeah. Well, and also, I mean, I think it's interesting that even as he's telling the story, he's saying like, "Yeah, you've never heard of it because history was written by the victors and they didn't write about it." So that's why you've never
Mhm.
heard of it, and so it's like it's kind of like we don't know the reality of it because a lot of this stuff probably didn't get recorded. Uh, it would only be remembered by its victims.
Yeah. Yep.
So yeah,
No. Totally. Um. All right. So we get to the night of the fire itself, and we see here that the Legion comes out with their torches and their hoods. And this is something that I wanted to talk about here as we get into this. The thing that I'm most fascinated about Will Hanlon and the way he tells the story is his like absolute desire to constantly see the best in people. Earlier in the chapter when he was talking to a younger version of Mike, he said that he really didn't think this happened because they were black, and he earnestly believed that. It was more, this was just Derry being Derry, which is like kind of a crazy thing to say when the people that burned down your bar were racists in white hoods. But like, you can kind of see his logic, right? This idea
yeah,
that like there's something about this place that makes people worse than they are, and it stops being about the thing that they're actually there to protest or to stop.
Yeah. And I mean, the fact that literally Pennywise shows up at the end of this suggests that there is a supernatural sort of force involved in this in some way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he also says like he's convinced that he's not 100% sure that the boys like meant to throw their torches into the windows. But rather he just thinks they lit them, maybe lost control of them and chucked them, and some of them just happened to have to go through the kitchen window. I have a hard time believing this. Like I see your point that like we know Pennywise is here at the end. That's the big reveal at the end of the chapter. To me, that always represented more that Pennywise is not just the source of evil in the town, but also like feeds off the evils that exist already. Similar to with Adrian Mellon, right? He didn't cause those kids to beat the shit out of Adrian Mellon and throw him off of a bridge, but he was there to benefit from it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the same role he has here at the fire at the Black Spot.
He's there to feed off of it.
Yeah. So like, I don't want to tell Will Hanlon like you're wrong, but also like, I think probably one of those racist assholes threw a torch through the window because he's a racist asshole.
Yeah.
That wanted to kill some black people. Like I don't know. That's what I think.
I mean, I love the idea that we are seeing that Will Hanlon is such a wonderful person that he just almost is incapable of believing the worst of people, even when they deserve it. It's just an admirable quality.
Yeah.
Even if it's in some ways naive, it's still like, wow, you can still have this attitude about humanity even after all you've seen.
Yeah, I agree. I wish I could be more like him sometimes.
Yeah, me too.
Regardless of whether it was thrown intentionally or accidentally, the torch goes into the kitchen and lights it on fire. The rest of the spot is rocking too hard to notice. That's another one he does, right? When they're saying the N-word to them and telling them to get out. Like, the literal interpretation of that is like, we want you out of our town. But to Will Hanlon, it's like, I think they were just telling us to come out of the Black Spot because it was on fire.
Yeah, excuse me, please vacate the building. We're trying to burn down your building.
Please
get out of it.
Leave in an orderly fashion. It's just kind of ridiculous. But the spot is rocking too hard to hear them or to notice the fire until it pushes out of the kitchen and into the main part of the bar. We were already kind of primed for this. I think King sets this up really beautifully, where like that we see as the spot is getting more and more and more popular. They're letting in more and more and more people, and so it's just kind of way overcrowded. Like if this was 2023, there would be a maximum occupancy sign on the wall, and they wouldn't let more people in, but it doesn't exist. And so the bar is just completely packed. People can barely move, and so when the fire breaks out, it's immediately a stampede. People rush the front door, which unfortunately swings inward, and thusly kind of creating a trap where people are completely stuck.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is one of those things that happens in real life. You got to wonder if there's some specific incident that King is even referencing here, because this isn't even that unusual. It seems like horrible fires killing tons of people just because they're overcrowded, and then they stampede and they can't get out the door, and just exactly the situation. I feel like this happened in the last few years, anyway.
I should have looked up whether this was based off a real event like the Adrian Mellon event was. Not sure about that, but
I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, as far as relating to, I mean, plenty of fires have happened this exact way. That's why there are regulations about fire doors that swing outward, and like all these things were created for reasons, because all these things happened.
Right. Yep.
So we see here that Will is almost stampeded to death, but is saved by his friend Trev, and then later, of course, by our friend Dick Halloran, who immediately reads the situation at the door as a bad one, as you said, probably with his shining, and suggests they go out a window instead of the door. Trev and William get out, and then William pulls out Dick, and it's fun in this moment. Another reason why this connection is fun, Matt, is it's fun in this moment to think of how both of these stories would have been different if these characters weren't here to save each other, right?
Mhm.
If Dick Halloran wasn't here to save William, then Mike would never have been born. And
Mhm.
what would that mean for the losers? And then on the flip side, if William hadn't pulled Dick out of the building, there would be some dead Torrances up in Colorado.
Yeah, a beautiful hotel with minimal damage and some dead Torrances. Yep. Yeah. No, that's really interesting. I like that. That's like
Mhm.
I didn't quite think of that, but that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just
Cool.
a fun little thing. Like, obviously, there's the books are set in stone. Like, there's no changing of that. But it is fun to see how these tales weave into each other. That Dick survived this encounter to go on and be a hero somewhere else, and William survived this encounter to go on and birth a son who will play a pivotal role in this story going forward.
Right. Yeah. Cool.
So we also see here that Trev prevents more people from dying by grabbing the army truck, backing it up into the wall of the black spot, knocking over part of the wall and freeing some people. We learn though, Matt, that 80 people still die in the fire, including basically all of William's closest friends. It's
Yep.
a sad, sad night.
It is a sad night. It is kind of awesome when he decks that one dude.
Yes.
Even though Trev gets put in the stockade or whatever.
Yeah, he gets punished for saving people because he punched
Yeah.
the sergeant that was a race the racist asshole sergeant from the beginning of the story. Yeah.
Yeah, like
That's justice for you.
The theme of this short story is basically just injustice is everywhere fractally throughout
Mhm.
the society, and you know, not that much time has passed since this happened, right?
Nope.
But both in terms of the story and in terms of the world. So
That's true. That is true. I wanted to read this last part because I just think, like, again, the writing of this story is just excellent, and I particularly liked this part. We stood there holding hands, just like you and me are doing now, Mikey. Hit him with the note right now, Mikey. Him with his nose broken and blood running down his face and his eyes puffing shut. And we watched them people. They were the real ghosts we saw that night. Nothing but shimmers shaped like men and women in that fire, walking towards the opening. Trev had bashed with Sergeant Wilson's truck. Some of them had their arms out, like they expected someone to save them. The others just walked, but they didn't seem to get nowhere. Their clothes were blazing, their faces were running, and one after another they just toppled over, and you didn't see them no more. The last one was a woman. Her dress had burned off her, and there she was in her slip. She was burning like a candle. She seemed to look right at me in the end, and I seen her eyelids was on fire. Just fantastically evocative, disturbing writing of people burning to death.
Yeah. That's one thing I wanted to actually mention is the fear of being trapped in a fire is portrayed incredibly well here. Like the actual feelings of sensations of what would be happening, and because I think there's a part of me being an idiot. I always imagine that, like, if I was in a burning building, I would simply blank, right? I would simply proceed toward the obvious exit and leave. And the book really forces you to consider, like, the complications that arise when, like, no, you can't go that way. It's too hot to go that way. You will die. And it's like hard to imagine that, right? It's hard to, like, imagine being in that situation because we've never really encountered that in our lives. But that's why people die in fires, is because they're having the same thought. They're like, well, just go that way. And then they realize they literally can't because it's an inferno. And then they're trapped. So yeah, I just overall, I agree with what you said. I think it's just fantastically well written, like horror about the idea of being trapped in a fire.
Yeah. So disturbing.
Yeah.
So as the story ends, there's one thing William Hanlon saw that he didn't want to talk about, but Mike asks one last time, "What did you see?" And it's a bird, Matt, a giant bird who swooped down, picked up one of the fleeing racists, and flew off with him. No, not flew, floated, because on its wings were tied a bunch of balloons.
Huh. So that's why it wasn't Rodan.
Well, but Matt,
Uh-huh.
but
Yeah.
this is when Mike is 15 years old. This is after he saw the bird that he learns this information.
True.
Mike has already seen the bird when he was 11. It's 4 years later, and he learns that his father saw a bird with balloons on it.
So, but I mean, I get it. I think that maybe though Pennywise is like, well, yeah, I don't know. It doesn't quite. Maybe Pennywise can't tell the difference between him and his dad. You know, it's maybe Pennywise is racist. I don't know. It's like,
oh shit, we've said a lot of mean things to Pennywise, but you just crossed the line.
Yeah. Well,
You're
no,
gonna piss him off now.
I know I shouldn't have said that. No, so like, okay. Another thing I want to say here is like, isn't it interesting that Pennywise in giant kaiju form picks up one of the racists and carries him off? Right?
Yeah.
Like, wouldn't you expect, like, hey, if we're just dumping on like the racial angle here, that he would grab one of the victims or something? And it's like, no, like one of the racists who is actively running away, he just snatches him.
Yeah. Pennywise is nothing but an equal opportunity eater.
So he's not racist then.
No, that's why I said he'd be offended. I mean, this does, I think, in all seriousness, raise some really interesting questions, right? Like, we know, or we can at least hypothesize by this point, that Pennywise is appearing before these people with their biggest fears, right? So we had like a sort of reason for why Pennywise would appear as a bird to Mike, right? Like, we set it up. He and his father watched the Rodan movie the night before. It was on his mind. Yada yada yada. Giant bird.
Yeah.
But now we've learned that all the way back in 1930, when the black spot caught on fire, who saw the giant bird first? Well, William Hanlon saw the giant bird. Why did William Hanlon see a giant bird? Was he afraid of giant birds? I don't know.
So I don't know where I saw this. It might have been on the Discord. I don't know where I saw this. Somebody mentioned the idea that it's like a bald eagle. So it's like America.
Yeah, that was on Discord. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I can't credit it because I don't remember where I saw it. But yeah, it was a bald eagle, which makes a degree of sense. But
sure, I like that. I don't remember the description of the bird being particularly eagle-like, but I don't hate it.
Yeah, I guess I saw it as a kind of raptor, but the coloring didn't really match. But then if you were to quiz me on the exact coloring right now, I would fail, other than to say that it had orange pom-poms on its whatever tongue, right?
Tongue.
Yeah.
Its breast was orange, I think, but also it had the pom-poms on its tongue. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, and then of course the question that is we're really getting at is like, well, why did Mike see the same thing his dad saw if he didn't even know that he saw that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I don't have a good answer for you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe we'll find out one day.
Yeah.
Or maybe not.
Or maybe not.
So the story ends, and Mike here types, "It's come again. I know that now. I'll wait, but in my heart, I know it. I'm not sure I can stand it. As a kid, I was able to deal with it, but it's different with kids. In some fundamental way, it's different." Not the first time we've seen a beat like that, right? But really reinforcing this idea that, like, they managed to win, or at least survive, when they were children. We don't know quite exactly how yet, but they did. We know they did, and now they're returning, and they've lost some essential part of themselves by being no longer children, and that's not good. It's not good news.
Yeah, yeah. It makes us worried about what's going to
Mhm.
happen.
So the chapter ends with Mike writing about his midnight visitor after he finished writing the book about the black spot. Turns out someone visited him while he was asleep at his desk. Footsteps and a balloon. Tied to my reading lamp was a single balloon, filled with helium. It floated in a morning sun ray, which slanted through one of the high windows. On it was a picture of my face, the eyes gone, blood running down from the ragged sockets, a scream distorting the mouth on the balloon's thin and bulging rubber skin. I looked at it, and I screamed. The scream echoed through the library, echoing back, vibrating from the circular iron staircase leading to the stacks. The balloon burst with a bang.
Love it. Love it.
End of chapter.
It's such a great. This is such a great book. I love this book.
I'm glad you're enjoying it. And that is it for part 2 of the novel, and that is it for us this week. Next week on the show, we will continue with it. We're going to be starting part 3 of the novel, which is titled Grown Ups. Matt, that's what part 3 is titled. Grown
Okay.
Ups. And we will be covering just one chapter next week, chapter 10, titled The Reunion. So maybe you can start to guess what our topic for next week's going to be.
Yes. I will begin I'll begin thinking really hard about that one.
But before we go for the week, we do have a discussion questions section to take care of. Matt, what was our question for our listeners last week?
The question was, who's your favorite teenage monster in fiction? This, of course, being in response to the multiple teenage monsters that we saw last week.
Mm-hmm.
And from here, we have T and Hypocrisy says, my take on most unsettling teen monster is a bit more metaphoric. Steph from Pretty in Pink, played unforgettably by James Spader, just chills me to the bone. Steph is obviously shallow, entitled, and even mundane, an ode to 80s excess. But the insidious thing about this douchebag is that he will grow up to be that guy who roofies girls in college and gets away with it. And he will undoubtedly one day ascend to the halls of power, doing something as crazy as, say, tanking the global economy with cynical and risky investment strategies. And again, he'll get away with it. Truly terrifying.
This is the exact kind of answer I was secretly hoping for when we posed this question, because it is delightful.
I love it. I love this this angle. I never would have guessed, actually, but yeah, that's amazing.
Next we have Bert Rogan, who says, because Matt loved my previous answer about the seminal 70s classic Black Christmas, I'm answering this question about the best teenage monster with yet another 70s classic, which oddly enough has a similar plot to Black Christmas. This time, it's the creepy as hell made-for-TV movie Bad Ronald, based on the even creepier book by sci-fi fantasy writer Jack Vance. The general plot is as follows. After weird teenager Ronald Wilby kills a younger neighborhood girl, he and his mother build a secret room under the stairs of their house so he can hide out until she can save up enough money for them to leave town and start a new life. Unfortunately, Mother unexpectedly dies, and a new family moves into the house, having no idea that an increasingly unhinged Ronald is still there, living with them and watching their every move. While the movie tones down a lot of the more twisted aspects of the novel, let's just say Ronald is very bad in the book. It still manages to maintain the unrelenting tension as the unsuspecting family goes about their lives, and Ronald descends deeper and deeper into the highly detailed fantasy world that he has created within the walls of their home. A world where he is the brave prince, and the youngest daughter is the princess he is destined to be with. The 1970s were a goldmine for made-for-TV movies, and Bad Ronald is considered by many, including Quentin Tarantino, who has talked about it often, to be one of the best.
Wow. I literally never heard of this.
Neither have I, and I'm like, that's par for the course for you, but I'm ashamed of myself.
Go fuck yourself, sir. No, it really sounds like the kind of thing I would have heard of, especially if it's Quentin Tarantino's favorite or whatever. Yeah.
I feel like we gotta watch this movie.
Yeah. It reminds me of the Red Letter Media riff on the idea of people living in the walls, which probably originates with this. Anyway, cool. Thanks for the suggestion. You've given us something to follow up on.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Brent Westward says favorite teenage monster of all time has to be Michael Jackson from the Thriller video intro. The tension building of the 50s teenagers watching a horror movie that you can only hear and not see, but you see the moviegoer's reactions. Then the trope of a car breaking down in the middle of the woods, to the phenomenal practical effects transformation, to the full-on wolf-out chase scene in the woods. 7-year-old me almost couldn't handle it. They say, as an Easter egg, the director of the Thriller video was John Landis, who placed the fake film "See You Next Wednesday" in both the video as well as the end of American Werewolf in London in Piccadilly Square.
I did not know that. I mean, I knew it was Landis that directed this, but I didn't know he put that fake film in both.
Yeah, that's funny. I love that. Didn't know that either.
I feel like Thriller was one of the first music videos I've ever seen, which I think is true for a lot of people, actually, and was kind of blown away by it.
Yeah, I mean, any Michael Jackson music video at all really is going to be pretty amazing and like perfect. But yeah, it's really a timeless work of art, actually.
Yeah. I tried to get my son to watch the Billie Jean music video because that's the one where he is walking around the city and stepping on things and they light up.
Uh-huh.
And my son was in a phase where he was like really obsessed with lights turning on.
Uh-huh.
So I thought he would be really into it, but no dice. Was not interested at all.
Yeah, you try again later. Yeah.
Yeah. TN Bugdoc says, I'm a huge MST3K fan, and their riff on teenagers from outer space remains one of my favorite episodes. The movie is only watchable, salted with their jokes. The tagline of the movie is, thrill-crazed space kids blasting the flesh off humans, captures the essence of 50s teen panic movies. Because of this one, I will forever pronounce torture as torcha. As a bonus, the giant lobster is thrown in as a monster antagonist, so surely Cy King loved this one as the cinema as a kid.
Great.
Are you a Mystery Science Theater fan? Is that the thing you watch?
Not really a thing I was ever into. Don't have anything against it. Just never had the opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I never watched it religiously, but I feel like it was one of those things where I was like up late, unable to sleep, and like flipping through channels on TV. And was it on Sci-Fi that it would play all the time?
I
was
just
one
don't...
channel that late at night would always just like put a marathon of them out there.
Yeah, I just don't remember seeing them. Like maybe it just wasn't in my usual rotation of channels that I flipped through back then. It wasn't until like college that anybody even tried to show me one, and I was like, "What is this?" Like I was very, very not clued into this whole thing. So
yeah, I have this really distinct memory of like flipping randomly and seeing it and like not knowing the concept at all of like this is what the thing is, and so you don't really understand what's going on when like you're watching an old black and white movie, but there are these three heads and two of them are robots. And it's like, as someone who never knew what it was just very confusing but fascinating, and I ended up like watching them every time I saw them, but like I never sought it out myself.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's weird. It's a weird idea, but it's fun.
It's fun, yeah.
All right, Labratio77 says, my first thought was Carrie White, but then I thought, who is the bigger monster, Carrie or the people who drove her to do what she did? So I'll say Chris Hargensen is my favorite teenage monster. What kind of person slits a pig's throat that dumps the blood on a girl, then causing her to unleash her psychic powers on a town? A monstrous one, that's who. Yeah, true. I like that. Well argued, Labratio.
Yeah, totally agree. That was such a fucked up, insane thing to do, actually.
Yeah. I mean, I like that the movies go even like in different directions, I guess, but emphasize that this person is actually the worst.
Yeah,
it's very, very good.
Jiraxis Eridar Lord says, my favorite teenage monster is a twofer and a spoiler for a movie that's almost 30 years old. Well, Matt doesn't have to worry about the spoiler anymore because we fixed him. But for the rest of you, we're about to spoil the first Scream. So if you care about that, I don't know, fast forward like a minute.
Yeah.
Billy Loomis and Stu Macher as Ghostface in Wes Craven's masterpiece, Scream. Once the masks are off and they show who they really are, it adds a whole new level to the movie. Matthew Lillard and his manic performance plays off his cohort so well. At the time, their motives were fresh, and there's a reason Scream flipped the genre on its head for years.
Yeah,
Great answer.
I agree.
Excellent answer.
Yeah, I actually, there's something I really like about the idea of sort of calling them both the monster, because number one, they kind of are, and number two, uh, well, okay, they literally are, but then also like they fuel each other's monstrosity, right? Like the
Yeah.
ghost face doesn't exist if it's just one of them. It has to be both of them kind of amping each other up, or at least that's the vibe that I always got.
Yeah, no. I'm sorry. The vibe that you always got
The vibe that I always got from all of my
from all the
times that
times
I've
you've watched
watched the
Scream.
movie, in fact, over the years, you know, just
For those that don't know, we did an episode of Scream on the Doofcast like 2 weeks ago, which is the first time Matt has watched it, because we found out on this very show, in this very section of the show, that Matt had never seen Scream.
Yeah. So go check out the Doofcast and see where we repaired that deficiency.
That's what I've always thought.
Just saying shit over here.
I think you're up.
All right. Unplucked Gem says, I'll be the first, probably not the last, to say Oz from Buffy. He's a werewolf, but he also plays bass in a band. He's the best. He's kind-hearted, and Seth Green's deadpan line delivery is so enjoyable to watch.
Man, now when you watch Buffy, you're gonna know Oz is a werewolf.
I've always known that.
Damn it. Next we have Damien to me says, The Lost Boys. You're a vampire, Michael. My own brother, a goddamn shit-sucking vampire. You wait till Mum finds out, buddy. That's a great answer. Yeah, it's been too long since I've seen The Lost Boys, man. I need to rewatch that movie.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a funny angle, though. Yeah. All right, Baby Can You Dig Your Sam says, my favorite teenage monster is Evil Ed from Fright Night. For most of the movie, he's just Charlie Brewster's best friend. Evil is a geek who shoots off his mouth similarly to Richie Tozier, and even though he loves monsters, he thinks his friend is crazy. When Jerry Dandridge turns Evil into a vampire, it is with his consent. Jerry lures him to the dark side by acknowledging that Evil is an outsider, that he doesn't belong, and that people laugh at him. And you see that vulnerability in Evil's face when he takes Jerry's hand. As a vampire, he is pretty scary looking. He's maintained that human sense of humor, but now it is more creepy and sinister. Peter Vincent is shocked by the transition. As Evil lays there dying, very, very slowly transforming from his wolf self to his human form, Peter Vincent is visibly saddened and clearly distraught at the death of Evil. Some pretty masterful acting between the two of them.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. I guess I'll say that, it's clear that the 2011 Fright Night remake is the better movie.
I'm going to stay out of this one. This is between
I'm
you and...
I'm literally just saying that because I know it will make Sam super pissed off. I do not think that at all.
All right. I'm not even part of this conversation.
I don't think I ever actually saw the Colin Farrell remake, to be honest with you. I heard not great things, so I didn't bother.
Oh, makes sense. I mean, I love Colin Farrell, but...
Yeah. I do too. Last but certainly not least, we have Just Stand 8460. We're all thinking it, right? It's just another Edward versus Jacob debate again. Well, I picked Jacob. I always like the rugged and deeply spiritual types versus that melodramatic pretty boys, aka vamps, especially when it comes to feeling peace in nature. Jacob is much more grounded in the natural order of the world. His culture is that of love and oneness. Even though Bella has a lot of depressed and dark thoughts, Jacob is better for her. He has the ability to draw her out. Edward is really just the devil incarnate, undead, cruel, down to the soul, unable to feel true, raw human emotion. Don't let his trembling voice and blue steel fool you. Plus, how cool is Jacob's midair transformation? Huh? Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, I like to watch that one fight scene from the end of one of the Twilight movies.
Yeah, it's the final one. It's the greatest moment in all of Twilight.
Yeah, and that's like the only part of any Twilight movie I've ever seen, as far as I can recall.
I watched the first movie because I was dating a girl that wanted me to watch the first movie. And,
yeah, as you do.
It was not good.
But wait, hold on. Is that the one where they play vampire baseball?
Yes.
So I assume you mean other than that part.
Well, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
I feel like if the movie had embraced the absurdity of it just a little bit more,
Uh-huh.
it would have been better. I guess
But
maybe it did. I mean, at one point, Edward calls her a spider monkey and then like climbs up a tree. What a fucking weird franchise, man.
yeah, I mean, I think the problem is if you the readers loved it for what it was and not because it was ridiculous. So if you made a movie that made it seem ridiculous, then that would have made the actual fans really mad. So you
Yeah.
couldn't do that too much.
I feel like the first movie, like tried to really lean into the ridiculousness a little bit. And then I never saw the ones after that except for the aforementioned awesome head ripping off fight that you're mentioning.
Uh-huh.
But I don't know.
Yeah.
God, what a strange time 2008 was.
Yep.
That was a great answer though. I would pick the werewolf over the vampire too.
Yeah, makes sense. Sure.
But that is going to do it for the discussion question for last week. Thank you, everyone who sent those in. Really enjoyed those. Apologies again, Sam, for very briefly making you very mad. All right, Matt, let's move into next week's discussion question. What do you got for us this week?
Next week's discussion question is who is your favorite female character in a predominantly male ensemble? So, we're gesturing here at the idea of a character like Bev, where you've got a story which is overwhelmingly male, but then there's the one woman, and I think Bev is a great character. I think Bev is a well-rounded character,
Mhm.
and that's that's the way to do this, right? If you're gonna have the one female character, you gotta put extra effort into making sure it's a strong anchor, and there's a lot of stories that do that. So give us your favorite example.
I agree, and I will say that this should be an easy one to answer because I think there are a lot of examples of stories with predominantly male casts with one woman.
Uh-huh. Yep.
But to your point, they can be really fantastically well drawn, wonderful characters. I love Bev. I think Bev is one of King's best characters in general, not even just best female characters, but just best characters. I love Bev. So talk to us about some different Bevs, please.
All right.
That's going to do it for us this week. As we said, next week we are just reading chapter 10, The Reunion, just one chapter. It's a little bit of a longer one. I think that is going to be a theme coming up here over the next few weeks, Matt. I think let's look at this. Yep. Chapter 10 is a solo one. Chapter 11 is a solo one. And then we get chapter 12 and 13 together. But I think actually next week's is going to be like the shortest amount of pages. We're going to be covering all book. But it just didn't.
Okay.
It just didn't work out to where I could add another chapter to that because the chapter after that is 78 pages, so it would have been a 150 page something section. So
yeah, it happens. Yeah,
but there's going to be a reunion
of some kind.
Yeah,
who knows who will be involved? Yeah,
what could that could mean?
I don't know. I have no idea. Remember, you can reach out to us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com, over on Twitter at kingslingerspod, and over on the subreddit at r/doofmedia.
If you're not already subscribed to Kingslingers, please do so right this very minute. You don't want to miss anything. You don't want to miss any of these episodes or any announcements or anything we do. So please make sure you subscribe. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, pretty much anywhere in the world podcasts are available.
That's right. And if you like Kingslingers and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia.
Yeah, I think we've got our Other Levels of the Tower episode coming up next week, which will be covering Cat's Eye. So this would be a pretty good time to join us on Patreon, so you don't miss that.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have that ready. We'll talk about that.
Uh-oh. If you cannot afford to join us on Patreon, that is absolutely okay. There are tons of ways to help us out. You can continue to share this podcast. We still get emails every week by people that have just found us, and they're finding us because of you. So thank you for that. You can also help us out by leaving us a rating and a review. This week's Spotlight review comes from Justin VK, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Just the deep dives on Dark Tower I need." Episodes are focused, full of good discussion, thorough, and fun to listen to. Thank you, Size. Well, I appreciate that. I don't know if I agree that they're focused, but I agree with the rest of it.
They're mostly focused on a particular book, you could say.
Yeah, mostly.
Sure, mostly.
We did talk about tape measures for a good.
Sometimes we talk about placentas. Mostly focused, though.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Justin. And thank you everyone else who continues to send in those rating and reviews. They really, really, really do help us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, folks, that's it. We will see you right back here next week for more It. Can't wait. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.